When you lose everything, you learn that pride is a luxury you can no longer afford. I discovered this the hard way. Chapter 1. The Offer. Sitting in my tiny studio in Bushwick, the blue light from my laptop illuminated my face in the darkness. It was 11:34 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, and I was writing my 5th article of the day. The title blinked on the screen like an accusation to my Columbia journalism degree. 15 celebrities who look like their pets. Number 7 will shock you. $20. That's what my dignity was worth now. I looked around the 35 square meter apartment I called home. There wasn't much to see. A bed that folded into the wall and that I rarely managed to fold because it required energy I didn't have. A table serving as desk, dining room, and kitchen counter, multifunctional by necessity, not by chic minimalist design. The window faced a brick alley so close I could count the cracks in the neighboring building's wall. The eviction notice was stuck on the refrigerator with a Statue of Liberty magnet. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, I was Emma Sinclair, investigative journalist for the New York Times. Journalism students said my name with reverence. Editors took my calls. My articles changed policies, exposed predators, mattered. Now I was just Emma, the woman Google algorithms associated with dishonest journalist and career destroyer. The woman whose name you wouldn't find in any serious publication, just on clickbait sites where truth mattered less than views. The rain began to beat against the window. October in Brooklyn always brought this melancholy, the kind of damp cold that penetrates your bones and makes you question every decision that brought you here. I pulled my worn hoodie up higher. I'd bought it at a thrift store last month because my winter coat had finally given up living and I couldn't afford a new one. Number 7 is really shocking, I muttered to myself, typing mechanically. Almost as shocking as an award-winning journalist writing this garbage. But garbage paid. Poorly. But it paid. I had $247 in my checking account. I'd counted 3 times that morning, as if the numbers would magically change. Rent was due in 3 days. $1,850. Simple math. Impossible math. My credit card had been maxed out for months. My anxiety medication had run out 2 weeks ago. I couldn't renew the prescription without paying for the $200 consultation, which I also didn't have. The panic attacks were coming back. Yesterday I couldn't leave the house. I stayed paralyzed in bed, chest tight, certain I was dying. Knowing rationally I wasn't, but unable to convince my body of that truth. Today I'd managed to eat half a sandwich left over from Saturday. Progress, I supposed. My last full meal had been when. My mind was too foggy to remember. I saved the article draft and opened my email for the 10th time that hour. Maybe one of the 47 pitches I'd sent this week had gotten a response. Maybe some editor somewhere had a short enough memory to forget I was blacklisted. The inbox loaded slowly. My internet was the cheapest available, which meant every page loaded as if being transmitted from the last century. Spam. More spam. An overdue electric bill I didn't know how I'd pay. And then an email that didn't look like anything I'd ever seen. The subject was simple. Job proposal, confidential. The sender was encrypted. No signature, no corporate logo, none of the usual formalities. Just a link to what appeared to be an encrypted chat room and a single line of text that made my heart stop. $10,000 for a conversation. Interested? My first reaction was to delete it. Obviously a scam. Or worse, some idiot who'd read about me and wanted to humiliate me publicly. Wouldn't be the first time. Since the cancellation, as I'd learned to call the implosion of my life, I'd received everything. Death threats detailed enough to give nightmares. Obscene proposals that made my stomach turn. Someone even sent a box with a dead rat to my old address at the Times with a note that said, "This you." But $10,000. The numbers glowed on the screen like an impossible promise. $10,000 was 6 months of rent. It was food. It was getting back to the psychiatrist. It was being able to breathe. It was probably a lie. A siren cut through the night outside, followed by the familiar sound of the J train passing on the elevated line. Brooklyn at night had its own soundtrack, a chaotic jazz of urban life that never really slept. I used to find it romantic when I moved here, right after college, full of dreams and ambition. Now it was just noise. I looked at the eviction notice on the refrigerator. Looked at the laptop screen. Looked at my hands trembling slightly on the keyboard edge, part medication withdrawal, part chronic anxiety that had become my constant companion. Pride was a luxury. And luxuries were for people who could pay rent. I clicked the link. The page loaded instantly, which was already suspicious considering my third world internet. Minimalist interface. Black background, white text. No logo. No identification. The kind of setup hackers in movies used. Or people who really valued privacy. Or serial killers. I wasn't sure which was worse. A message appeared on the screen before I could even decide if I should be there. He thanked me for entering and said he had a proposal. Formal. Polite. As if offering $10,000 to strangers in encrypted chat rooms at almost midnight was perfectly normal. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Every fiber of my journalistic training screamed to close the laptop. Report this. Be sensible. But sensibility was another luxury I couldn't afford. I typed that I was listening. The response took time. 15 seconds that felt like 15 minutes. I could imagine whoever was on the other side choosing words carefully, deleting and rewriting, pondering exactly how to present themselves to a desperate journalist in the middle of the night. Finally, he explained. He needed someone to write his story. Not the version the world knew, but the real one, the true one. The one no one saw. My journalistic skepticism immediately raised red flags. Why me? Why would anyone choose a discredited journalist to tell their story? I asked exactly that. The answer came quickly this time. One word that hit me like a punch. Exactly? Exactly? What? My tired brain struggled to process. Then he elaborated, and it all made terrible sense. He didn't want my name on the work. No one would publish anything signed by me anyway. He wanted my talent, my ability to find truth hidden in lies, my way of making people feel something real when they read. Someone had read my work, my real work. Not the articles about celebrities and their damn dogs, but the investigations that mattered, the stories that had cost everything. My chest tightened in a way different from panic attacks, something between pain and hope. I asked what the catch was, because there was always a catch. He was direct. We would never meet in person. All interviews would happen there in that chat after midnight. I would write, he would pay. $50,000 for the complete manuscript. I pulled away from the laptop as if it had shocked me. $50,000. My mind short-circuited trying to process that number. $50,000 was more than I'd earned in the last 2 years combined. It was a full year of rent. It was security. It was the difference between surviving and living. It was impossible. No one offered that kind of money to a ruined journalist to write ghost biographies for anonymous strangers in encrypted chat rooms in the middle of the night. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was my only option. Thunder echoed outside. The rain intensified, beating against the window in a frantic rhythm that matched my racing heart. I looked around the apartment again. The walls stained with moisture that I pretended not to see. The sink with accumulated dishes because I was saving hot water to prolong the bill that was already late. The notebook that worked on the strength of hatred and whispered prayers every time I turned it on. The drawer under the bed. Inside it, 3 years of work no one would ever see. Complete investigations on corruption, abuse, injustice. Stories I kept writing even without being able to publish. Because giving up writing would be giving up the only thing that defined me. But truth didn't pay bills. Truth had left me broke and alone in a moldy studio in Brooklyn. I asked what would happen if I said no. The answer came without cruelty. Just statement of fact. I would close the laptop and continue writing about celebrities and their pets. He knew. He'd read not just my old work, but the recent stuff. He knew exactly where I was. How low I'd fallen. How desperate I was. But there was no malice in it. Just ... recognition. As if he understood exactly what it was to be trapped between who you used to be and who you were forced to become. My fingers moved before my brain could intercept, typing the question that would change everything. When do we start? The laptop clock changed to midnight exactly when the answer arrived. Now, tonight. And then he asked a question that had nothing to do with journalism or qualifications or experience. He asked what was the first story I remembered believing was real. I stared at that question for a long time. The rain continued. The subway passed again. Some couple fought in Spanish in the apartment next door. Life continued, indifferent to the moment that seemed to be crystallizing in that anonymous chat room. And then I began to type. I told him about my childhood in Queens. About my mother reading to me before bed, each word a promise that stories mattered. About my father religiously watching the news every night, explaining that journalists were guardians of truth. About the day I understood that words could change the world, that stories had real power, that there was something valuable enough to dedicate a lifetime to. Truth. And then I told him about the story that destroyed me. I told him about the 3 women who came to me with stories of harassment. About Michael Cardenas, lifestyle section editor-in-chief at the Times, powerful man with connections and money enough to bury anything. About the 8 months I spent investigating, verifying every detail 3 times, building an irrefutable case. About the article going live, the immediate explosion. Social media on fire. Other women starting to speak. And then, a week later, the 3 women retracting, saying they'd misinterpreted, that I had coerced them, that Cardenas was innocent. Only later did I discover he'd paid $200,000 to each one. Money enough to change lives. Money enough to buy silence. But by that point, no one cared about my version of the story. I was the dishonest journalist. The career destroyer. The liar. I told him how the Times fired me by email. How friends stopped responding to messages. How my boyfriend broke up with me because he couldn't deal with the drama anymore. How I went from a decent apartment in Park Slope to this hole because it was the only place that accepted someone with destroyed credit. I told him everything. Not as articulate as it sounded in my head, more hesitant. More broken, but honest. And when I finished, it was almost 1 a.m. 47 minutes of digital confession to a completely anonymous stranger in an encrypted chat room. I hit send and immediately wanted to delete everything. Exposing myself like that was insane. He could use that against me. Could be recording. Could be a journalist too. Looking for a story about the fallen journalist? The response came in seconds, but it felt gentle. He thanked me for trusting him with that. Said we'd see each other tomorrow at midnight. And then, just when I thought the conversation was over, he added something that made my heart tighten. I wasn't wrong about truth, he said. I just learned that truth has a cost. But some stories were still worth that price. His was one of them. And then he left the chat. I sat staring at the empty screen for a long time after. The rain had diminished to a soft drizzle. The city was quieter now. That strange New York quietness of the early morning hours, when even chaos takes a pause to breathe. I closed the laptop slowly and dragged myself to bed. Didn't change clothes. Didn't brush my teeth. Just fell onto the thin mattress and stared at the water-stained ceiling. I couldn't sleep. My mind spun in infinite circles. Who was he? Why me? What was he hiding that was big enough to justify all this secrecy? But the question that bothered me most was different. Why did it seem like a complete stranger understood me better after one conversation than people who'd known me for years? And why did that scare me as much as it comforted me? I had no answers. Just the promise of $50,000 and the certainty that I'd just entered something much bigger than I imagined. Outside, the first rays of light began to clear the eastern sky. A new day in New York, a new story beginning. For the first time in 3 years, I felt that familiar and almost forgotten sensation tightening my chest. Curiosity. The spark that makes journalists do stupid things in pursuit of truth. I'd sworn I'd never feel that again. That it was dangerous. That it had destroyed me. But there it was, lit again. And I knew, with the absolute certainty that only comes at 3 a.m. when your life is in ruins and a stranger offers hope, that I was going to follow this story wherever it led. Even if it destroyed me again. Maybe especially if it destroyed me again. Because at least it would be a destruction that mattered. Chapter 2. First conversation. Loneliness isn't being alone. Loneliness is being surrounded by people who look at you, but no one really sees. I'd learned the difference over the last 3 years. It was 11:58 p.m. on Wednesday, and I was sitting in the same place as always, in the uncomfortable chair that came with the apartment, at the table that wobbled if I didn't put a piece of cardboard under one of the legs, with a mug of cold coffee I'd reheated 3 times in the microwave because making new coffee seemed wasteful. But for the first time in months, I wasn't watching the clock out of anxiety. I was watching it out of anticipation. The rain had taken a break, leaving Brooklyn wrapped in a damp fog that made the streetlights look blurred and distant, as if the entire city was underwater. Outside, someone shouted something I didn't understand. A door slammed. The subway passed, making the windows tremble. The usual symphony of urban night that had become the backdrop of my existence. I opened the encrypted chat room 2 minutes before midnight. My fingers drummed nervously on the keyboard. I'd spent the entire day thinking about who my mysterious client could be. The part of me that was a journalist, the part that never really died, just got dormant and wounded. Couldn't turn off. I'd made a list during the subway ride to the public library in Clinton Hill, because my home internet plan was limited and loading infinite research pages would consume my quota in hours. Sitting between high school students doing homework and elderly people reading newspapers, I scribbled clues in an old notebook. Tech company. Considerable fortune. Manhattan, public figure, military father. Absent mother since 12. Feared leader. Available after midnight. Sophisticated vocabulary. Quoted Dostoevsky. But all the research led nowhere. Or rather led to many places. There were dozens of tech CEOs in New York who partially fit the profile. None completely. And the more I searched, the more convinced I became that I was looking for the wrong person, in the wrong way. Because the man in the chat didn't seem real. No real person was that vulnerable with strangers, that open about pain, that ... human. The screen flickered at exactly midnight. He greeted me formally, as if we were in a business meeting and not in an anonymous chat room in the middle of the night. Good evening, Emma. You came back. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He knew I'd come. He probably saw me in the auditorium, though I couldn't imagine how with thousands of people there. I came. I typed back, and I stared at that single word for a long time. And, as if all the weight of the world was contained in it, and what do you think? And what did you see? And do you hate me now? You wear a black tie. I finally typed. And quoted Dostoevsky. Another pause. I imagined him on the other side. In some apartment in Manhattan, probably still in a suit, maybe having taken off the tie but not much else. Reading my words and knowing exactly what they meant. Yes, he replied simply. You don't sound anything like your voice. In the podcast. Or here. I know. Is it intentional? Longer pause this time. Everything about me during the day is intentional, Emma. Every word calculated. Every expression controlled. Every movement measured. I perform the role of Alexander Hunt, CEO, because that's what keeps me alive in that world. And at night? At night I try to remember who I was before I learned to perform. I stared at those words, feeling something tighten in my chest. Not pity. Not exactly, but recognition. Because I understood performing. Understood becoming something you're not to survive. I hated you today, I typed. When you humiliated that man who asked the privacy question. When you treated people like they were inconveniences instead of human. I know, he responded. I'd hate me too. Why do you do it? The answer took so long I thought he wouldn't respond. Because if I'm kind, they think I'm weak. If I show empathy, they try to exploit it. If I admit not knowing something, I lose credibility. In the corporate tech world, there are only 2 types of people, predators and prey. If you're not one, you're automatically the other. And you chose to be predator. I chose to survive. There's a difference. Even if it doesn't seem like it. I closed my eyes. Breathed deeply. Tried to process this justification that sounded simultaneously reasonable and terrible. You hurt people, I typed. Yes. And you know it. Yes, every day, every decision. I know exactly how many lives I impact negatively. I keep a list, employees I fired, families affected, business partners I crushed. I keep a mental list of each one. It's my penance. My way of not forgetting there are real costs to my decisions. Why do it then, if you know it hurts? Because the alternative is worse. If I don't cut costs, the company fails. If the company fails, 3,000 people lose jobs instead of 30. If I'm not ruthless in negotiations, we're exploited. If I show weakness, we're devoured. It's always a choice between hurting few or hurting many, and I choose few. But that doesn't make the weight lighter. I was silent for a long time. I didn't know what to say, didn't know if I believed him. Didn't know if it mattered. The midnight philosopher, I finally typed. Is that where you put all the humanity you can't show during the day? It's where I breathe, he responded. It's the only part of me that's still real. The CEO is a necessity. The podcast is a choice. And this conversation with you. It's the first time in years I feel like I can be both. That someone can see both and not demand I choose. Do you want me to choose? He asked. Want me to be just one or the other? Because I can do that. I can end the podcast. I can stop being vulnerable. I can be just the CEO you saw today. Or I can resign. Let someone else be the monster. Live as a normal, poor, happy person. But Emma... Neither of those versions is complete. Neither is true. The truth is, I'm both. The monster and the poet. And the only way I've found to exist is by completely dividing them. Are you asking for my permission? I asked. I'm asking for your understanding. I looked at the screen. At his words. At the raw vulnerability in them. And I realized he wasn't trying to justify himself. He was trying to be seen completely. All the parts, even the ugly ones. I understand, I finally typed. I don't agree with everything. I think you can be better than you are. Less cruel. More human. But I understand you're trapped. That the system you operate in punishes vulnerability and rewards coldness. That you're doing the best you can within a framework that's fundamentally broken. And I understand being divided. I'm two people too. The journalist I used to be and the survivor I became. And neither version is complete alone. Thank you, he responded. For not running away. Not yet, I corrected. But today was hard. Seeing you like that. It was hard. I know. Do you want to stop? End the book? Forget this happened. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was the exit. The opportunity to go back before getting more deeply involved in something that clearly had no happy ending. But I didn't want to stop, despite everything, or maybe because of everything. No, I typed, I want to continue, but with one condition. What? I want to meet you. In person. Face to face. Not just the CEO version or the podcast voice. You, whoever that is when no camera is on and no role is being performed. If I'm going to write your story, I need to know the man. Not the masks. Long pause. The longest yet. I'm not good at it. Being myself face to face. I don't have practice. Then practice. With me. Another silence. Coffee. Brooklyn. Your territory. Saturday morning. Saturday works, I agreed. EMMA. I'll try. But I can't promise the man you'll meet will be what you expect. I might be disappointing in person. You already disappointed me today, I typed. And I'm still here. So show up. Try. And let's see what happens. 10 a.m.? There's a small cafe on the corner of Moore and Bushwick, distant. Unlikely to have anyone from my industry. I'll be there. Good night, Emma. Good night, Alexander. It was the first time I'd used his real name. It felt strange and intimate at the same time. Like crossing an invisible line. He left the chat. I sat staring at the empty screen, heart beating fast again. Saturday. 2 days. I was going to meet Alexander Hunt in person. No screens. No anonymity. Just two destroyed people trying to have an honest conversation about living divided. What could go wrong? Everything. Absolutely everything. But I was going anyway. Because I was a journalist. and journalists chase stories. Even when stories promise to break what little remains of your heart. Especially then. Chapter 3. The Ghost of Manhattan. There are two types of ghosts in New York. Those who've already died and those still trying to live. I was never sure which category I fit into. It was Thursday afternoon, and I was at the Brooklyn Public Library, the Clinton Hill branch, because it was close enough to walk and save subway fare, and it had unlimited free Wi-Fi that I desperately needed. My table was covered with open notebooks, notepads with increasingly frantic scribbles, and a cup of coffee from the machine that tasted like dirty water but cost only $1. I was hunting a ghost, my ghost. In front of me, the notebook listed everything I knew about my mysterious client. Tech company. Considerable fortune. $50,000 was clearly pocket change for him. Lived in Manhattan, or at least knew the city intimately. Public figure enough to make privacy impossible. Military father with brutal expectations. Emotionally absent mother since he was 12. Built a persona of feared leader, not loved. Always available after midnight, which meant either chronic insomnia or a schedule flexible enough to choose when to work. Sophisticated vocabulary. Casually quoted Dostoevsky. And something else I'd noted during our last conversation. He said a wrong reading in his life could cost millions. Or lives. Or both. Millions at stake suggested high-stakes business. Lives suggested, what? Medical technology? Security? Defense? I started researching. Google, LinkedIn, Forbes, TechCrunch. All opened simultaneously because my patience for loading pages had died months ago. The list of possible candidates grew rapidly. David Chen, CEO of Streamflow. Former military consultant, logistics company possible. Marcus Johnson, founder of Neuralink. Father was a senator, which would explain family pressures. Neurotechnology company. Also possible. Alexander Hunt, CEO of Hunt Technologies. Father was an army general. AI and cybersecurity company valued at $8 billion. I stopped at that last name. Something about it made my journalistic instinct wake up, that feeling of when you're close to something important, but can't quite see the full picture yet. I clicked on the photo. Steel gray eyes looked back at me through the screen. Angular face, strong jaw. The kind of appearance that seemed sculpted in marble. Perfectly cut black hair, not a strand out of place. A suit that probably cost more than my annual rent. Militarized posture, shoulders back, straight spine, as if relaxing were a sin. But it was the expression that got me. Completely neutral. Not cold exactly, but empty. As if he'd learned to turn off every facial muscle that could betray emotion. The kind of face that revealed absolutely nothing. The caption said, Alexander Hunt, 36, CEO of Hunt Technologies. AI and cybersecurity company valued at $8 billion. Known for rigorous leadership and immaculate growth record. Rigorous leadership, corporate code for tyrant. I clicked another link. Forbes had an extensive profile. NYC's coldest tech tyrant. Why employees fear Alexander Hunt. I kept going down the rabbit hole. Business Insider. Hunt Technologies leads in innovation. But at what cost? Former employees report impossible environment. TechCrunch. Alexander Hunt. The man who never smiles. An opinion piece on Medium from a former employee. I worked for Alexander Hunt for 3 years and never saw him eat or sleep. Who is this man? I opened tab after tab, building a profile. Official biographies were sparse on personal details, but consistent. Father, General Marcus Hunt, deceased in 2020 from heart attack. Mother, Victoria Hunt, born Ashford, heiress to a Boston family, lived reclusive in Martha's Vineyard since 1999. Since Alexander was 12, exactly as he'd said. Education, MIT at 16. Masters in Artificial Intelligence at 19. Founded Hunt Technologies at 22 with venture capital money and part of the family inheritance. Never married. Never photographed with a romantic partner. Appeared at charity events alone or accompanied by female executives from the company in clearly professional arrangements. Known for working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. Employees reported emails from him at 3 in the morning. Meetings at 6 a.m. Impossible expectations. Zero personal social media presence. The company's Instagram and Twitter were managed by a PR team. Alexander Hunt, the person, didn't exist digitally outside of articles about the company. I leaned back in the chair, biting the tip of my pen. Everything fit too perfectly, but something didn't make sense. If he was so cold, so calculating, so monstrously perfect, where did all that vulnerability in our conversations come from? That raw pain? That admission of not knowing who he really was? People like the articles described didn't have existential crises. Didn't stay awake at night wondering if they were still real. Unless that was exactly the mask he was talking about. The public persona so well built that no one saw the man suffocating underneath it. My phone vibrated in my pocket, making me jump. Spotify notification. New episode from At Midnight Philosopher. I smiled involuntarily. That podcast had become my secret indulgence over the last 6 months. No, correction. My lifeline. An anonymous man talking about literature, philosophy, vulnerability. The voice was warm, thoughtful, gentle in a way that made you feel like you were talking to an old friend instead of listening to a podcast. It was like sitting in an empty bar at 3 a.m. with someone who really understood. Who knew what it was to be broken and still try to find meaning. Who didn't have answers but asked the right questions. I put on my cheap headphones, those that came with the phone 3 years ago and barely worked in the left ear, and pressed play. The familiar voice filled my ears. Hello, Night Ghost? It's midnight somewhere. And I'm here again, talking into the void and hoping the void answers back. I closed my eyes, letting the voice envelop me. He always started like this. Night ghosts. As if all of us listening were spirits wandering the city, looking for connection in the early morning hours when the rest of the world slept. Today's theme is the cost of truth, he continued. I opened my eyes. I was thinking today about what it means to be honest in a world that punishes honesty. About people who choose to tell the truth knowing it will destroy them. And I wonder, is that courage or madness? My heart started beating faster. I met someone recently not in person, but sometimes the realest connections happen with people we never see. This person chose truth, paid a brutal price, and you know what's extraordinary? They still believe it was worth it. No, it couldn't be. I envy that. The ability to lose everything and still believe. Because me? One chose the lie. I chose the mask. And every day I wonder if there's still anyone underneath it. The same words. The exact same words from yesterday's conversation. There's a Dostoevsky quote that always haunts me. Man is a mystery. He needs to be unraveled. And I'm trying, Night Ghost. I'm trying to unravel myself before it's too late. I took off the headphones with trembling hands, heart beating so hard I felt it in my neck. I looked around the library as if someone could explain what was happening. A teenage girl was studying 3 tables away. An elderly man read the newspaper near the window. No one noticed that my world had just turned upside down. I put the headphones back, needing to be sure. If I could just be real face to face, he continued. If I could integrate instead of divide. If I could find someone who sees both halves and doesn't demand I choose. But I'm terrified. Because what if there's nothing real left? What if I've performed so long that performance is all I am? My mysterious client wasn't just a tech CEO, he was At Midnight Philosopher. The podcast 500,000 people listened to. The voice that made me feel less alone on my worst nights. The anonymous stranger who seemed to understand loneliness in a way only truly lonely people understood. But who was he in the real world? I went back to the research with renewed urgency. At Midnight Philosopher had started 2 years ago. I went to check the launch of the first episode. March 2023. I went back to articles about Alexander Hunt. In March 2023, he canceled an important keynote due to exhaustion. First time in 5 years he'd missed a public commitment. Exhaustion. The rich and famous euphemism for nervous breakdown. I kept digging. The more I read, the more obvious it became. The pieces fitting together like a puzzle. Alexander Hunt was brilliant, feared, ruthless. But he was also a chronic insomniac, workaholic to the point of self-destruction. Had no personal life, and started to look tired in public photos exactly when the podcast began. As if maintaining two lives simultaneously was draining him until nothing was left. A daytime life of brutal perfection that demanded every ounce of energy. A nighttime life of anonymous confessions that was the only way to breathe. I looked at his photo on the screen again. Those steel gray eyes. I tried to imagine warmth in them. Tried to imagine the podcast voice warm, vulnerable, intensely human coming from that marble face. I couldn't. But it made complete sense. A man so repressed he needed to create a completely separate identity just to be human. Who could only exist as a real person when hidden behind total anonymity. I checked the time. 11:42 p.m. 18 minutes to midnight. I packed my things frantically, thanked the librarian who gave me a worried look, probably because I looked crazy, and ran outside. The subway took forever. I stood tapping my foot impatiently as the train stopped at every station, watching every second pass on my phone's clock. When I finally got to my building, I ran up the 4 flights of stairs, which was a mistake considering my diet consisted mainly of coffee and anxiety. I entered the apartment breathless, turned on the laptop. 11:57 p.m. The chat room loaded. I sat staring at the empty screen, heart still racing, not just from running, but from revelation. Should I confront him? Say I knew. But something made me hesitate. He'd chosen anonymity carefully. Deliberately. If I exposed him now, he might disappear. And part of me, the part that had been alone so long it forgot what real connection was, didn't want him to disappear. Not yet. Not when I'd finally found someone who seemed to understand. 12 a.m. The message appeared. Good evening, Emma. I looked at the words. Thought about Alexander Hunt on conference stages, impeccable and impenetrable. Thought about the at-midnight philosopher voice, vulnerable and real. Thought about the man on the other side of this screen, living 2 lives because one alone couldn't contain everything he was. I typed back asking how his day was. He responded, long, impossible decisions, as usual. And yours? He asked. I smiled at the screen. Interesting. I spent the day researching. Researching what? Ghosts, I typed. There was a long pause. I imagined him on the other side, in some penthouse office or minimalist apartment, realizing exactly what I was saying. Find any? He finally asked. Maybe, but ghosts are hard to identify, especially the ones still alive. Another pause. Longer this time. True. Tell me about your research. What fascinates you about ghosts? And so began another conversation. This time about identity. About the masks we wear not to deceive others, but to survive. About the difference between who we are and who we need to be to not break completely. He talked about pressure. About expectations that crush until you become so compressed, you can't recognize your own shape anymore. About living an entire life performing perfection while crumbling internally, and no one seeing the crumbling because the performance is too good. I talked about invisibility. About what it's like to be seen only as a distorted version of yourself. About the loneliness of being known but not recognized. Of having your name everywhere but your essence nowhere. We talked for hours. About Dostoevsky and existentialism. About what it means to be real in a world of performances. About whether it's possible to wear a mask so long it fuses to your face. At 2:17 a.m., he said something that made everything stop. Did you listen to my podcast today? So he knew I knew. I stared at the question. I could lie. Pretend I had no idea what he was talking about. Keep the illusion a little longer. But we were talking about masks and truth. It seemed wrong to lie. I listened to all of them. For 6 months, I typed. And yet you didn't run when you figured it out. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, with something that felt like genuine surprise. Why would I run? I asked. The answer took time. 43 seconds, I counted. Each one feeling like an eternity. Because now you know I'm 2 people. And one of them is someone you'd probably hate if you met during the day. I thought carefully about my response. Words mattered here. Truth mattered. Or maybe you're one person desperately trying to be 2 because neither version alone can survive. I typed. The daytime person keeps you safe. The nighttime person keeps you sane. I don't hate you. I understand. Another long silence. I imagined him reading and rereading my words. Looking for judgment that wasn't there. Looking for the rejection he probably expected and that I refused to give. Will you research who I am during the day? He finally asked. Already did. The response came in a second. And? I looked at Alexander Hunt's photo still open in another tab. The frozen face. The empty eyes. The tyrant reputation. The articles calling him inhuman. And then I thought about the voice in the podcast. The words on the screen. The vulnerability he only showed when completely hidden. Found some possibilities I typed, but it doesn't matter. Because the man I'm getting to know is this one. The one who shows up here after midnight. The rest is just context. Thank you, he responded simply. And then, Emma. There's a tech conference Friday. Keynote at 2 p.m. The speaker will be someone you've probably written about. If you go ... you'll know who I am. My face, my name, everything. My heart raced again. He was giving me a choice. Keep the safe illusion or face complicated reality. But Emma, he continued, I'm not sure you'll like what you see. I already knew I wouldn't like it. I'd already read the articles. Already seen the accusations. Already knew Alexander Hunt was exactly the kind of corporate CEO I used to expose in investigative pieces. But I also knew there was more to him than that. There had to be. Because the man I was getting to know here was real in a way the CEO couldn't be. Which conference? I asked, though I already knew the answer. TechCrunch Summit. Javits Center. I'll be there, I typed. Then we'll see each other for the first time. Even though you'll see me and I won't see you. There was something sad in that. The idea of being seen without seeing back. Of finally having a face but remaining blind. Good night, Emma, he typed. And, thank you for not running. Good night, I responded. He left the room. I closed the laptop slowly and went to the window. Manhattan glowed in the distance through the fog, each light a life, each life a secret. How many of those lights were from people like us? Awake at 2 a.m, talking to strangers, looking for connection in unlikely places. Somewhere in that jungle of glass and concrete was Alexander Hunt, billionaire CEO the world feared. Anonymous podcaster 500,000 people loved. And the man who typed confessions to me after midnight because it was the only way he knew how to exist. Friday. Less than 2 days. I wasn't sure if I was anxious or terrified. Probably both. Definitely both. I went to bed but knew I wouldn't sleep. My mind was racing too fast, processing everything. The revelation, the connection. The fact that in less than 48 hours, I was going to put a face to the ghost. And then I'd have to decide. Continue this impossible story or run while I still could. But it was already too late to run. I realized as I stared at the ceiling. I was already invested. Already cared. Already started seeing this anonymous stranger as something more than a client paying. As someone who understood. And that was simultaneously the most comforting and most terrifying thing I'd felt in years. I fell asleep when the sun was already rising, not with nightmares but with anticipation. With the feeling of being on the edge of something. Of an important story. Of a connection that could change everything. Or destroy what little remained. Friday couldn't come fast enough. And at the same time I wished it would never come. Chapter 4. 2 Voices, 1 Man. There are moments in life when you realize reality is much stranger than any fiction you could invent. Friday arrived too fast and too slow at the same time. I spent Thursday night unable to sleep, staring at the stained ceiling of my apartment, thinking about all the ways that day could destroy the fragile connection I'd built with a stranger. Because that's what he still was. No matter how many hours we'd spent talking. A stranger. A ghost with a voice but no face. Until today. I got up at 6 a.m. even without having slept. Made coffee that came out too strong because my hands were shaking while measuring. Tried to eat toast, but my stomach refused to cooperate. Anxiety or excitement, I couldn't tell the difference anymore. Probably both, mixed in a toxic combination that made my chest tight. I opened my closet. If 4 hangers and a cardboard box could be called a closet, and looked at my clothing options. Not many. Most of my good clothes had been sold during the first year post-cancellation, when I still had illusions it would be temporary, that I'd get a job soon, that I wouldn't need the money from the engagement ring I never wore. I chose the only blazer I had left, black, slightly worn at the elbows, but still presentable if you didn't look too closely. Dark jeans that disguised being 2 sizes too big because eating was an inconsistent luxury. Basic white blouse. Flat shoes because my only pair of heels had broken 6 months ago and fixing them cost more than I had. I looked at myself in the small, cracked bathroom mirror. Deep dark circles that no amount of cheap concealer could hide. Brown hair that needed a cut months ago, pulled back in a bun I tried to make look intentional instead of desperate. Face thinner than it used to be. Cheekbones more prominent in a way that wasn't healthy. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman who'd seen better days and wasn't sure she'd see them again. Perfect for a tech conference where everyone would look like they walked out of Apple ads. The TechCrunch Summit started at noon, but I arrived at the Javits Center at 10:30. Partly because I wanted to make sure I could get in freelance journalists didn't exactly get VIP invitations. Mostly because staying in the apartment another hour would make me go crazy. The Javits Center in Manhattan always impressed me even now. Glass and steel extending for entire blocks, natural light flooding the interior through transparent walls. It was the kind of architecture that was supposed to make you feel small in an inspiring way. Today, it just made me feel out of place. Thousands of people already packed the lobby. The tech industry uniform was consistent. Expensive jeans, brand-name sneakers, startup hoodies, MacBooks under arms like status symbols. Everyone looked confident, connected, part of something bigger. I was wearing a decades-old blazer and carrying a notebook that weighed 5 kilos, clearly didn't belong here. I got a freelance press credential after lying to 3 different people about covering the event for a tech blog I made up on the spot. It wasn't hard. No one really verified these things if you sounded confident enough, and years of journalism taught me to sound confident even when crumbling internally. I entered the main hall 2 hours before Alexander Hunt's keynote. I needed to choose my spot strategically. Close enough to see clearly. Far enough not to seem suspicious. Middle of the auditorium, aisle, easy exit in case I panicked and needed to leave. Because there was a very real possibility I would panic. I sat and waited. Around me, conversations about AI, encryption, market disruption. Words that used to excite me when I covered tech for the Times. Now they just reminded me of everything I'd lost. I pulled out my phone, opened Spotify, went to a Midnight Philosopher's profile and put on my cheap headphones. Listened to the most recent episode again, that warm and reflective voice talking about masks and identity. In a few hours I was going to put a face to that voice, and everything would change. The auditorium started filling around noon. Thousands of people flowing into seats, noise increasing until it became a constant roar of conversations and expectation. Lights lowered. Someone announced the keynote would start in 10 minutes. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my neck. I took off my headphones and put them away. Breathed deeply. Tried to prepare for whatever was about to happen. The lights lowered completely. A giant screen lit up on stage. Corporate video started playing images of technology, code. The Hunt Technologies logo spinning in 3D in a way that probably cost more than my annual rent to produce. Professional narration about innovation and future and digital transformation. The right words in the right order to say absolutely nothing substantial. And then the presenter's voice echoed through the sound system. Please welcome the CEO of Hunt Technologies, Alexander Hunt. The auditorium exploded in applause. And he walked onto the stage. The first thing I noticed was the posture. Military perfect, as if he'd spent his entire life being corrected by someone with a ruler and stopwatch. Shoulders back, straight spine, every movement economical and precise. Nothing wasted, nothing casual. He was wearing a dark suit, not black, but charcoal gray that was probably the same color as the eyes I'd seen in photos. Perfectly tailored, obviously custom-made. The kind that cost the equivalent of 3 months of my rent. Black tie. Shoes that shined under the stage lights. He didn't look human. He looked like a photograph. An illustration. The personification of successful CEO you'd find in a business manual. He reached the center of the stage, stopped, looked at the auditorium with those steel gray eyes I'd seen in photos, but which were somehow more intense in person. Not because they were more expressive, on the contrary. They were completely empty, like looking at opaque glass. And then he began to speak. The voice was different. Completely different from the podcast voice. It was cold, modulated, calculated. Every word enunciated with surgical precision, no hesitation. No emotion. As if he were reciting something he'd memorized, not just the words, but the exact tone in which each should be delivered. He spoke about innovation in artificial intelligence, about cybersecurity and the future of digital privacy, about how Hunt Technologies was leading the transformation of how data was protected and processed. It was all technically impressive. He clearly knew what he was talking about. But it was sterile. Like listening to a manual being read aloud by someone who didn't care about the content. Nothing about that man on stage seemed to have any relation to the man I knew through the screen. Nothing. Zero similarities beyond obvious knowledge of technology. I sat there, watching, searching for any trace of humanity, any moment of vulnerability, any indication that the man who quoted Dostoevsky at midnight existed somewhere inside that perfect shell. 20 minutes into the presentation, I'd found nothing. And then he quoted something. A quick phrase, almost casual, buried in the middle of a discussion about ethics and AI. Man is a mystery that needs to be unraveled. And we at Hunt Technologies believe technology is the tool for that unraveling. Dostoevsky. The same quote he'd used in our first conversation. The same one that appeared in the podcast. He continued talking about technology and ethics as if he hadn't just revealed everything. But I'd heard. I'd seen. For a fraction of a second, something changed in his expression, so brief I wouldn't have noticed if I wasn't looking specifically. A slight jaw clench. As if those words cost something to say. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that needed no more proof. Alexander Hunt was my client. Was at Midnight Philosopher. Was the ghost I'd been chasing. And he was exactly as monstrous as the articles suggested. The presentation continued. He answered questions from the audience with brutal efficiency. No beating around the bush, no kindness, just cutting facts delivered with the emotion of someone reading a shopping list. When someone asked a question he considered stupid, he didn't disguise it. Simply said the question demonstrated a lack of basic understanding of the subject and moved to the next person. The audience loved it. Or pretended to love it. Enthusiastic applause. As if corporate cruelty was something to admire. I felt sick. How could this cold and calculating man on stage be the same person who wrote about loneliness and masks? Who admitted not knowing if he was still real? Who thanked me for seeing him? It didn't make sense. Unless that was exactly the mask he'd talked about. The armor he'd built so well it fooled everyone. Including, apparently, himself. The presentation ended with more applause. Alexander Hunt left the stage with the same perfect posture he'd entered with. Didn't smile. Didn't wave. Just left as if he'd fulfilled a tediously necessary obligation. I sat while the auditorium emptied around me. People commenting on how impressive, intimidating, brilliant he was. How he represented the future of technology. No one mentioned he looked completely empty. No one but me had seen how that Dostoevsky quote cost something. I grabbed my phone. It was 2:47 p.m. In a little over 9 hours, I'd have another conversation with him. At midnight, in our chat room. And I had no idea what I was going to say. I left the Javits Center in a fog. Brooklyn never seemed so far. The subway was packed with people coming back from work, all pushed against each other in uncomfortable silence. I stood because there were no seats, holding onto the bar as the train swayed, looking at my reflection in the dark tunnel window. I looked lost, confused, like someone who just discovered reality was much more complicated than expected. Because that's what Alexander Hunt was. Complicated. Impossible to categorize. Monster and poet. Ruthless CEO and vulnerable philosopher. Two people occupying the same body, and neither version seemed completely real or completely false. I got to the apartment at 7:30 p.m., made coffee. Tried to eat. Failed. Sat in front of the laptop with 6 hours still until midnight. And started writing. Not for his book. For me. Trying to process what I'd seen. Who he was. How someone became so divided they needed two completely separate identities just to exist. At 11:55 p.m., I opened the chat room. At 11:59 p.m., I looked at the empty screen and wondered if he'd show up. If there was something I should say. How do you confront someone about being two people when you yourself barely feel like one? 12 a.m., the message appeared. Good evening, Emma. You went. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. He knew I'd gone. He probably saw me in the auditorium, though I couldn't imagine how with thousands of people there. I typed back. And? I stared at that single word for a long time. And? As if all the weight of the world was contained in it. And what do you think? And what did you see? And do you hate me now? You wear a black tie, I finally typed. And quoted Dostoevsky. Another pause. I imagined him on the other side. In some Manhattan apartment, probably still in a suit, maybe having taken off the tie but not much else. Reading my words and knowing exactly what they meant. Yes, he replied simply. You don't look anything like your voice. In the podcast. Or here. I know. Is it intentional? Longer pause this time. Everything about me during the day is intentional, Emma. Every word calculated. Every expression controlled. Every movement measured. I perform the role of Alexander Hunt, CEO, because that's what keeps me alive in that world. And at night? At night, I try to remember who I was before I learned to perform. I stared at those words, feeling something tighten in my chest. Not pity. Not exactly, but recognition. Because I understood performing. Understood becoming something you're not to survive. I hated you today, I typed. When you humiliated that man who asked about data privacy. When you treated people like they were inconveniences instead of human. I know, he responded. I'd hate me too. Why do you do it? The answer took so long I thought he wouldn't respond. Because if I'm kind, they think I'm weak. If I show empathy, they try to exploit it. If I admit not knowing something, I lose credibility. In the corporate tech world, there are only two types of people, predators and prey. If you're not one, you're automatically the other. And you chose to be predator. I chose to survive. There's a difference. Even if it doesn't seem like it. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, tried to process this justification that sounded simultaneously reasonable and terrible. You hurt people, I typed. Yes, and you know it. Yes, every day, every decision. I know exactly how many lives I negatively impact. I keep a list. Employees I fired. Families affected. Business partners I crushed. I keep a mental list of each one. It's my penance. My way of not forgetting there are real costs to my decisions. Why do it then, if you know it hurts? Because the alternative is worse. If I don't cut costs, the company fails. If the company fails, 3,000 people lose jobs instead of 30. If I'm not ruthless in negotiations, we're exploited. If I show weakness, we're devoured. It's always a choice between hurting few or hurting many, and I choose few. But that doesn't make the weight lighter. I was silent for a long time. Didn't know what to say. Didn't know if I believed him. Didn't know if it mattered. The midnight philosopher, I finally typed. Is that where you put all the humanity you can't show during the day? It's where I breathe, he responded. It's the only part of me that's still real. The CEO is a necessity. The podcast is a choice. And this conversation with you. It's the first time in years I feel like I can be both. That someone can see both and not demand I choose. Do you want me to choose? He asked. Want me to be just one or the other? Because I can do that. I can end the podcast. I can stop being vulnerable. I can be just the CEO you saw today. Or I can resign. Let someone else be the monster. Live as a normal, poor, happy person. But Emma... Neither of those versions is complete. Neither is true. The truth is, I'm both. the monster and the poet. And the only way I've found to exist is by completely dividing them. Are you asking for my permission? I asked. I'm asking for your understanding. I looked at the screen, at his words, at the raw vulnerability in them. And I realized he wasn't trying to justify himself. He was trying to be seen completely. All the parts, even the ugly ones. I understand, I finally typed. I don't agree with everything. I think you can be better than you are. Less cruel. More human. But I understand you're trapped. That the system you operate in punishes vulnerability and rewards coldness. That you're doing the best you can within a framework that's fundamentally broken. And I understand being divided. I'm two people too. The journalist I used to be and the survivor I became. And neither version is complete alone. Thank you, he responded. For not running away. Not yet, I corrected. But today was hard. Seeing you like that. It was hard. I know. Do you want to stop? End the book? Forget this happened. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was the exit. The opportunity to go back before getting more deeply involved in something that clearly had no happy ending. But I didn't want to stop, despite everything, or maybe because of everything. No, I typed, I want to continue, but with one condition. What? I want to meet you. In person. Face to face. Not just the CEO version or the podcast voice. You, whoever that is when no camera is on and no role is being performed. If I'm going to write your story, I need to know the man. Not the masks. Long pause. The longest yet. I'm not good at it. Being myself face to face. I don't have practice. Then practice. With me. Another silence. Coffee. Brooklyn. Your territory. Saturday morning. Saturday works, I agreed. EMMA. I'll try. But I can't promise the man you'll meet will be what you expect. I might be disappointing in person. You already disappointed me today, I typed. And I'm still here. So show up. Try. And let's see what happens. 10 a.m.? There's a small cafe on the corner of Moore and Bushwick. Distant. Unlikely to have anyone from my industry, I'll be there. Good night, Emma. Good night, Alexander. It was the first time I'd used his real name. It felt strange and intimate at the same time. Like crossing an invisible line. He left the chat. I sat staring at the empty screen for a long time afterward. The rain had stopped. The city was quieter now. That strange New York quietness of the first hours of the morning when even chaos takes a pause to breathe. I closed the laptop slowly and dragged myself to bed. Didn't change clothes. Didn't brush my teeth. Just fell onto the thin mattress and stared at the water-stained ceiling. I couldn't sleep. My mind spun in infinite circles. Who was he? Why me? What was he hiding that was big enough to justify all this secrecy? But the question that bothered me most was different. Why did it seem like a complete stranger understood me better after a few conversations than people who'd known me for years? And why did that scare me as much as it comforted me? I had no answers. Just the promise of $50,000 and the certainty that I'd just entered something much bigger than I imagined. Outside, the first rays of light began to clear the eastern sky. A new day in New York. A new story beginning. For the first time in 3 years, I felt that familiar and almost forgotten sensation tightening my chest. Curiosity. The spark that makes journalists do stupid things in pursuit of truth. I'd sworn I'd never feel that again. That it was dangerous. That it had destroyed me. But there it was, lit again. And I knew, with the absolute certainty that only comes at 3 in the morning when your life is in ruins and a stranger offers hope, that I was going to follow this story wherever it led. Even if it destroyed me again. Maybe especially if it destroyed me again. Because at least it would be a destruction that mattered. Chapter 5, Meeting Between Masks. There are 1,000 ways to be nervous. I'd experienced most of them over the last 3 years. The nervousness of job interviews you know you'll lose before they start. The nervousness of opening emails knowing there'll be rejections. The nervousness of panic attacks at 3 in the morning when your body decides you're dying and your mind can't convince it otherwise. But this was different. Saturday morning, 9:47 a.m. and I was sitting in a tiny cafe on the corner of Moore and Bushwick. The place was called The Grind. Terrible name, even worse decor, but surprisingly good coffee and cheap enough that I could afford it. I'd come here a few times in recent months when I needed to get out of the apartment before going completely crazy. The cafe was almost empty. A hipster couple in the corner, laptops open, pretending to work but clearly just browsing social media. Barista behind the counter, teenager with a nose piercing and headphones, cleaning the espresso machine with studied laziness. And me, sitting at a table near the window, mug of black coffee half empty, watching every person who passed on the street. Looking for Alexander Hunt. I didn't know exactly what to look for. Perfect suit, military posture, those empty steel gray eyes I'd seen on stage, or something different. Some version of him that was neither CEO nor podcaster, but something in between. I checked my reflection in the window for the 10th time. I tried to look put together without looking like I was trying. Dark jeans, simple black blouse, the same blazer as always, because it was the only piece of clothing that still made me look remotely professional. Hair down this time, falling on my shoulders in a way I hoped looked casual but had taken 20 minutes to achieve. Minimal makeup because I didn't have much and didn't know how to apply it properly anyway. A bit of concealer on the dark circles, mascara, nude lipstick I'd stolen from my sister 2 years ago that was probably expired but still worked. I looked tired, but a more presentable kind of tired than usual. Progress. 9:52 a.m. My stomach was in knots. I tried to eat before leaving toast with butter, nothing elaborate, but only managed half before giving up. Nervousness killed appetite, which was convenient considering I rarely had appetite anyway these days. I tried to understand why I was so nervous. It wasn't like this was a date. It was work. Professional. I was interviewing a client for a book I was going to write. That was all. Except it wasn't. Because somewhere in the last few weeks, in the midnight conversations, in the shared vulnerability, Alexander Hunt had become more than a client. He'd become, what? Friend seemed both too big and too small. Confessor? Mirror? The only person in 3 years who seemed to understand what it was to be fundamentally broken and still try to function. Whatever the word was, it wasn't professional, and that scared me. 9:56 a.m. The cafe door opened. I looked instinctively, heart accelerating. But it was just an Uber Eats delivery person picking up an order. I let out the breath I was holding. Why was I so nervous? Worst case scenario. He was terrible in person. Cold and uncomfortable like he was on stage. We'd have an awkward conversation. I'd write the damn book, take my money and move on. Best case scenario. He was human. Genuine. And somehow that made the entire connection we built in text translate to reality. I didn't know which scenario scared me more. 10 a.m. The door opened again, and this time it was him. I knew immediately, though he looked nothing like the man on stage. Nothing like a suit. Nothing like military perfect posture. He was wearing dark jeans, not the expensive, precisely faded jeans of Tech Brothers, but normal, regular, almost common jeans. Gray t-shirt under a black leather jacket that had seen better days. Sneakers that were genuinely sneakers, not $500 fashion statements, and his hair was slightly messy. Not purposefully messy in the way rich men pay stylists to achieve, but genuinely disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it nervously many times. But it was the eyes that confirmed it for me. Steel gray, unmistakable. Except now, instead of empty, they looked ... scared. Alexander Hunt, $8 billion CEO, looked absolutely terrified. He saw me and froze for a second. Just a fraction of a moment where I could see him considering turning around and leaving. Running. Keeping the illusion safe behind screens. But then he walked to my table. I stood up automatically, not quite knowing why. Some instinct of formality that journalism had taught me. We looked at each other for a second that felt like an eternity. He was taller than I expected. 6'2", maybe. Broad shoulders but not as much as they seemed in the suit. Face younger without the corporate armor. but with lines of tension around the eyes and mouth that suggested he rarely relaxed. He spoke first, voice lower than on stage, less controlled. Said hello with my name as if testing the sound of it out loud. I responded with his, Alexander. Not Alex. Something about him didn't seem like someone who used nicknames. We stood there, awkwardly, neither of us knowing what to do. Handshake? Hug? Just sit? He offered his hand first. I shook it. His palm was warm, slightly damp, nervous. The great CEO was nervous. The idea was almost funny. We sat, him across the table from me, hands clasped in front of him in a way that looked defensive. He looked at the coffee mug in front of me. He asked if I wanted another. I said no, thank you. He said he'd get one for himself, just a minute. I nodded. He went to the counter. I watched as he ordered black Americano, no sugar, no milk, functional. The teenage barista showed no sign of recognizing a billionaire standing in a Brooklyn cafe. Why would she? Outside the suit, Alexander Hunt looked just ... like a guy. Outside the suit, Alexander Hunt looked like just ... like a guy. Someone you'd pass on the street without a second glance. He came back with coffee, sat again. Took a long sip, as if he needed the caffeine for courage. Or something to do with his hands. We sat in silence for maybe 30 seconds. Uncomfortable silence, the kind that screams that both are searching for the right words and not finding any. Finally, he spoke. Said he wasn't good at this. At being real face to face. Apologized in advance if he was strange or distant or disappointing. I said I wasn't expecting perfection. That made us even. He almost smiled. Almost. A slight curve at the corner of his mouth that died before fully forming. As if smiling was a skill he'd unlearned. I asked how he was. Basic question, stupid, but I didn't know how to start this impossible conversation. He thought for a long time before answering. Said he was scared. Hadn't admitted that to anyone in years. But he was terrified. Of me. Of this conversation. Of being seen. Why of me? I asked. Because I was real, he said. Everything in his life was performance or business. But I was genuine. I'd suffered and didn't completely hide it. Still had hope even though broken. Still believed in things even after things had destroyed me. He envied that. And was afraid that, meeting me in person, I'd realize he was empty. That there was nothing behind the masks except more masks. Infinitely down. I stared at him while he spoke. Not at his eyes, he was staring fixedly at the coffee in his hand, but at the small things. The way his jaw tightened when he searched for words. How his fingers drummed nervously on the side of the mug. A muscle twitching near his left eye, betraying stress his voice tried to hide. He was human. Painfully. Obviously human. I told him he didn't look empty. He looked scared. He looked like someone who'd spent so long being strong that he forgot how to be weak. And that weakness wasn't the opposite of strength. It was part of it. He finally looked at me. Really looked for the first time. Those steel gray eyes meeting mine, and I saw pain. So much pain it made my chest tighten. He asked how I did it. Kept being vulnerable after everything. After being betrayed, destroyed, left with nothing. How I didn't build walls. I laughed. Not a happy laugh, but bitter. Said I had walls. Huge walls. I just didn't have resources or energy to maintain them. Poverty was a great equalizer. You couldn't pretend to be okay when you were living in a moldy studio writing about celebrity pets. Vulnerability wasn't a choice for me. It was inevitability. He said he envied that too. The inevitability. Because he had choice. Had money and power enough to never have to be vulnerable if he didn't want to. And he didn't want to, but also couldn't stop wanting to. We talked for an hour, then 2. The cafe around us filled and emptied with the weekend brunch crowd. The barista changed shifts. The sun changed angle through the window, casting new shadows across the table. Alexander told me things he'd never said out loud. About his father, the general who measured affection in achievements and punishment in anything less than perfection. About his mother, who had a nervous breakdown when he was 12 and never really came back. Who was still alive but absent in all the ways that mattered. About building the company at 22, with no idea what he was doing, just running from a dying father's disappointment who never found anything good enough. About the first time he fired someone. A woman in her 40s with 2 kids. How he vomited in the bathroom after. How he had to learn to turn off that part of him that felt. About panic attacks that started 2 years ago. So severe he sometimes couldn't leave the apartment. About hiding it from everyone, employees, board, media. About performing normalcy while crumbling. About starting the podcast as therapy. A way to expel all the humanity he couldn't show during the day. And how it had become the only thing keeping him sane. I listened. Really listened, the way journalists are trained to, but which had become impossible in recent years because listening required energy and I had so little. But with him, I had energy, maybe because his pain echoed mine. Maybe because for the first time in years someone was being as honest as I needed to be. I told him too. About the victims who retracted. About watching my career evaporate in days. About my boyfriend breaking up with me via text because he couldn't deal with the drama. About friends who stopped answering messages. About the first time I couldn't pay rent. About selling my engagement ring I never wore at a pawn shop for 1/10 of what it was worth. About writing clickbait articles and crying afterward because it felt like betraying everything I stood for. About nights when I wasn't sure I wanted to wake up the next morning. He listened without interrupting. Without offering solutions or platitudes or trying to fix, just listened. And somehow that was more than anyone had done in 3 years. When I finished, we sat in silence for a while. Not the uncomfortable silence from the beginning, but something different, softer, mutual recognition of survivors. He spoke finely, voice low. Said I was the bravest person he knew. That choosing truth knowing the cost was heroism. That continuing to believe after losing everything was strength he didn't have. I said he was wrong. That courage wasn't choosing truth once. It was choosing to get up every day after truth destroyed you. It was performing functionality when you were broken. It was existing divided and still trying to find integration. That he was braver than he knew. He looked at me for a long time. And then did something completely unexpected. He smiled. Not a corporate smile, not performative. But a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes and made them look less gray and more silver. That transformed his face completely from marble to flesh. And I realized he was beautiful. Not in the cold, perfect way of corporate photos, but beautiful in the way real people are. Imperfect and tired but alive. I asked why he was smiling. He said he didn't remember the last time someone called him brave. Usually it was feared, respected, admired, hated, but never brave. And that I was the first person in years who made him want to try. Try to be whole. Try to integrate the parts instead of keeping them eternally separate. That meeting me, really meeting me, not just talking through screens, had changed something. I didn't know what to say to that. My heart was beating fast in a way that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with ... Something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time and wasn't sure I should be feeling now. Because this wasn't professional. This wasn't client and ghostwriter. This was something else, complicated and impossible and dangerous, but I didn't want to stop. He checked the time on his phone. It was 1:17 p.m. We'd been there for more than 3 hours. He asked if I had plans for the rest of the day. I said no. The truth was I never had plans beyond surviving. He said there was something he wanted to show me. If I was willing, what? I asked. His apartment, his space. Where he really lived when he wasn't performing. He said if I was going to write his story, I should see where the podcaster existed. Where Alexander at Midnight lived. I should have said no. Every rational part of my brain screamed that going to the apartment of an essentially strange man, no matter how many conversations we'd had, was stupid and potentially dangerous. But the part of me that was a journalist, the part that always chased stories even when dangerous one, and maybe another part too, the lonely part, the part that had found connection and didn't want to let go yet. I said yes. We left the cafe together. Brooklyn was alive with the weekend families in the park, Couples at brunch, children screaming in the streets. Normal life happening around us as two broken strangers walked side by side towards something uncertain. He'd come by Uber, not driver, not limousine. Just normal Uber Black because, he explained with almost embarrassment, he never learned to drive. Grew up in Manhattan where no one drove, and then had drivers, and now it was too late to learn. I didn't have a car either, obviously. Could barely afford the subway. He ordered another Uber. We waited on the corner, awkward again, searching for words. He asked if I was sure about this. Said I didn't have to go if I didn't want to. That he'd understand. I said I was sure. Lie. I wasn't sure of anything. But I was going anyway. The car arrived. Black Toyota Camry, silent driver. We got in, me on the right side, him on the left. Careful space between us in the back seat. As the car navigated through Brooklyn toward Manhattan, I looked out the window and wondered what the hell I was doing. Going to a billionaire's apartment. A man I'd known for weeks but only met in person today. A man who lived two lives and wasn't sure which was real. Was this journalistic story or something more? I had no answer. Just the certainty that I'd crossed some invisible line. And there was no going back. Chapter 6. In the Space Between Worlds. Manhattan on the other side of the bridge seemed like a different planet from Brooklyn. Cleaner. Brighter. More expensive in ways that were simultaneously obvious and subtle. The Uber dropped us off in front of a building in Tribeca. It wasn't the kind of ostentatious skyscraper I expected. It was elegant, discreet, the kind of luxury that didn't need to shout because it knew its own worth. Glass and steel with clean lines. Uniformed doorman who waved to Alexander without surprise, as if he brought strangers home frequently, which I very much doubted. We entered the lobby. Marble on the floor, abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than my entire apartment's market value. Everything perfectly lit, perfectly maintained, perfectly impersonal. Alexander was tense again. The ease we'd reached at the cafe had evaporated. He was back to being uncomfortable, posture getting more rigid with each step. He pressed the elevator button 3 times, though it was already lit. Nervous. He was nervous about bringing me here. The elevator arrived, we entered. He pressed the number for the top floor. Penthouse, obviously. Because of course it was. We went up in silence. I looked at the mirrored ceiling of the elevator, avoiding our reflections because seeing us both there together made everything seem too real too fast. The elevator stopped. Doors opened directly into a private vestibule. Just one door. The entire apartment was the floor. Alexander unlocked it, hesitated with his hand on the handle. Looked at me. Said it wasn't what I expected. Asked that I not judge too harshly. I didn't know what to expect. Billionaire penthouse. Probably impeccable and minimalist and cold like the man on stage. He opened the door. I was completely wrong. The apartment was messy. Not dirty, nothing was dirty exactly, but disordered in a way that suggested real life. Books piled on every available surface. Not arranged in elegant shelves, but stacked on the floor, on the couch, on the coffee table. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, in piles that looked precarious, but probably followed some logic only he understood. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering insane views of Manhattan Freedom Tower in the distance, the Hudson River snaking, Brooklyn on the other side. But heavy curtains covered most of it, blocking the view. As if natural light were the enemy. The space was open living room, kitchen, work area flowing together without dividing walls. But it felt smaller than it should because it was so full. Not of furniture, the furniture was minimal, a gray couch that looked comfortable instead of stylish, a dining table covered in papers, 2 chairs but of evidence of life, empty coffee mugs. At least 12 that I could count. Notebooks. 3 laptops open on various surfaces. Professional headphones hanging on hooks. Podcast microphone mounted in a corner, homemade sound absorption panel behind it. Clothes thrown on the back of a chair. Not perfect suits, but hoodies and t-shirts. Evidence that he really lived here, not just inhabited the space between corporate commitments. It wasn't what I expected. It was better. It was human. He watched me react. anxiety obvious on his face. Apologized for the mess. Said he had a cleaning service that came twice a week, but he always messed everything up again immediately. I said it was perfect. It looked like someone really lived here. Not a magazine photo, not a showroom, a home. He looked relieved. He offered coffee. I accepted, though I'd already had more caffeine than I should. But I needed something to do with my hands, some way to occupy the strange silence of being in his personal space. He went to the kitchen chef's kitchen that clearly rarely saw real cooking use, judging by the impeccable surfaces. Made coffee in a professional machine that probably cost more than my laptop. The sounds were comforting. Grinding beans. Boiling water. Domestic normalcy. I walked through the space while he prepared coffee, looking but not touching. Respecting the space but absorbing details. The book piles were eclectic. Dostoevsky next to AI technical manuals. Marcus Aurelius, near business books. Poetry, philosophy, neuroscience, romance. No apparent organization beyond temporal proximity. He clearly read multiple books simultaneously, picking whatever matched his mood. Post-it notes everywhere. On books, on walls, on laptops. Fragmented thoughts in surprisingly illegible handwriting for someone so controlled. Remember, vulnerability does not equal weakness. Next episode. Cost of perfection. Call therapist session canceled 3 times. Photos were scarce. A single frame on the shelf, older man in military uniform. Hard face, not smiling. The father, obviously. None of the mother. None of friends. Just the dead father looking with disapproval. Alexander returned with 2 coffees. Handed me one. Our hands touched briefly in the transfer. His hands were warm from the mug. He apologized again for the state of the place. Said it was where he came to be the nighttime version of himself. That during the day he worked at the office, surrounded by assistants and executives and performances. But at night, here, he could be whatever remained when the masks came off. I asked where he recorded the podcast. He pointed to the corner. The professional microphone, sound panels, dedicated laptop beside it. Simple but effective setup. Said he recorded between midnight and 2 in the morning usually. When Manhattan was quiet enough. When he turned off enough from the CEO to access the philosopher. I asked if I could hear his voice. The real one. Not the CEO's, not the podcasts. Just his. He looked confused. Said he was using his real voice. I said no. He was using a voice he'd thought he should use. Softer than the CEO's, less performative than the podcasts, but still not completely genuine. I asked him to tell me something. Anything. But without thinking about how it sounded. Without adjusting tone or cadence, just speak. He was quiet for a long time. Looking at the coffee. Searching for words or courage or both. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. More scratched. Less controlled. With more texture. He said he didn't sleep well. That most nights he stayed awake in this apartment. Surrounded by books and silence. Wondering if this was all his life would be. Wealth and success and complete loneliness. That he'd had a woman once. Years ago. She was an executive at another company. Smart, ambitious, perfect on paper. They dated for 8 months, but she never saw beyond the CEO, and he never let her. When she ended it, she said it was like dating a robot. Functionally perfect but emotionally absent. He didn't disagree. Since then, nothing. Occasional dates arranged by well-meaning friends, but nothing that survived the 3rd time because he didn't know how to be vulnerable face to face. Didn't know how to let someone see. Until now. With me. For the first time in years, he wanted someone to see. Wanted to stop performing and start existing. But he didn't know how. His voice broke a little at the end. Not dramatically. Just a small crack that suggested real emotion under careful control. I put my coffee on the table. Walked to where he was standing near the window, looking at Manhattan through the half-closed curtains. I said he was doing it now. Existing. Being seen. That this admitting fear and loneliness and failure was more real than any persona he performed. That he didn't need to know how. He just needed to keep trying. He looked at me. Really looked for the second time that day. Those steel-silver eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my heart skip. And he said something that changed everything. He said that for weeks he'd been trying to figure out what he felt about me. If it was gratitude for me not running away. If it was connection of similarly broken souls. If it was simply loneliness recognizing loneliness. But now, here, with me in his space, seeing him without masks, he had no more doubts. He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. I saw it in his eyes. Felt it in the air between us, charged with something neither of us was prepared to name. My brain screamed warnings. This was dangerous, complicated, professionally stupid, emotionally idiotic. I could barely take care of myself. How could I possibly get involved with someone as broken as I was? 2 shipwreck survivors trying to save each other only meant 2 drownings. But my body wasn't listening to my brain. I took a step closer, narrowing the distance between us. Not much. Just enough to be intentional. He didn't step back. Didn't advance. Just stood there, absolutely frozen. As if any movement could break the moment. I asked what he wanted. He told the truth. Said he wanted to stop being divided. Wanted to integrate. Be all the parts of him simultaneously and have someone who could handle the mess of it. Wanted to know me. Really know me. Not just as ghostwriter or midnight connection, but as a person. In all my broken complexity. And wanted me to know him. All the versions. The brutal CEO. The vulnerable podcaster. The scared man in the middle. I asked if he understood what he was asking. That really knowing someone meant seeing the ugly parts, the flaws, the bad days, the baggage. And I had a lot of baggage, he said he did too. That maybe compatible baggage was better than incompatible perfection. I almost laughed. Almost. Because there was absurd truth in that. But then I thought, what about the book? And the $50,000 I desperately needed? And the professional line we were clearly about to cross, or had already crossed without realizing. I vocalized those concerns, said this complicated everything. That if whatever this was, happened, I couldn't write the book objectively. That maybe I shouldn't write it anymore. Alexander was quiet for a long time. Thinking, always thinking before speaking. Then he said the book was important, but not as important as this. As what was happening between us. That if I wanted to stop the book, he'd understand. Would still pay. Call it a consulting fee or research or whatever made sense on paper. Because he didn't want money to be the reason I stayed or left. He wanted me to choose. Free of financial obligation or professional duty. What did I want? I stood looking at him. At this impossible man who lived impossible lives, and somehow had chosen me as the person to see everything. Who was simultaneously everything I'd normally avoid, powerful, corporate, the kind of person I used to expose in investigative pieces, and exactly what I understood, broken, alone, trying to figure out how to exist in a world that punished vulnerability. I didn't know what I wanted. Wasn't sure of anything except the fact that I was tired of being alone. Tired of pretending I was okay. Tired of performing functionality when I was falling apart. And Alexander was the first person in 3 years who made me feel less alone. Who understood. Who didn't judge or demand or expect perfection. Who just wanted real connection, no matter how messy. I said all that, not as articulate as it sounded in my head. More hesitant. More broken. But honest. And then I took another step. Eliminating the distance between us completely. I looked up. He was taller. I had to look up and saw nervousness in his face. Fear. Hope. Vulnerability he never showed to anyone. I asked if I could touch him. His face. Just to make sure he was real. That this was real. He nodded. Slightly. Almost imperceptibly. I raised my hand trembling a little, because when was the last time I intentionally touched anyone? And placed it on the side of his face. His skin was warm. Slightly rough with a few days' stubble. Human. So completely human. He closed his eyes at the touch. As if it were simultaneously painful and necessary. And then, so slowly it was almost not happening, he leaned down, asking permission without words. I could have stepped back. Should have stepped back. This was madness. This was complicated. This was all wrong. But it also felt inevitable. As if all our midnight conversations, all shared vulnerability, all recognized loneliness was leading exactly here. So I leaned in too. Our lips touched, soft, hesitant, almost asking if this was okay. And when neither of us pulled back, the kiss deepened. Not aggressive, not passionate the way romances describe, but desperate in a different way. Like two shipwreck survivors finally finding solid ground. Like loneliness finally ending. When we separated seconds or minutes or hours later, time had lost meaning. We stood there, foreheads touching, breaths mingled. Two broken people trying to figure out if together they made something whole or just more broken. He whispered my name, Emma. Just that, but it sounded like a prayer. I whispered back, Alexander. Not Alex. He'd never be Alex. And then he asked if I could stay, not implying anything. Not assuming. Just stay. Watch a movie. Order food. Sit in the same space and exist together without performance. I should have said no. Should have put distance. Re-established boundaries, but I was so tired of should. So tired of doing the sensible thing when the sensible thing only left me alone. So I said yes, and we stayed. Sat on his couch surrounded by books. Ordered Thai food that cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. Watched a movie neither of us paid attention to. We talked. About everything and nothing. About favorite books and worst meals and childhood fears. Small things, normal things. The kind of conversation people have when they're getting to know each other without agenda. At some point, my head ended up on his shoulder. His arm around me. Comfortable. Right in a way nothing had felt right in a long time. When I looked at the clock, it was 11:47 p.m. Almost midnight. Alexander noticed too. Smiled, that rare and real smile that transformed his face. Said that for the first time in years, he wasn't anxiously waiting for midnight. Wasn't waiting to escape to his nighttime identity. Because for the first time, he existed completely. Both halves simultaneously. Without division. With me. And as terrifying as it was also liberating. I understood completely. Because I was also starting to feel whole again. Not just survivor anymore. Not just fallen journalist. Just Emma, in all my broken complexity. And it was enough. Chapter 7: When Private Becomes Public. Reality has a cruel way of destroying perfect moments. I woke up Monday morning in my own apartment. I'd gone back by Uber Sunday night. Alexander insisting on paying because Brooklyn by subway at 11 p.m. was dangerous, and I was too tired to argue. My phone was on the nightstand where I'd thrown it before passing out in bed. Exhausted but satisfied in a way I hadn't felt in years. Sleep had been good. No nightmares. No waking up at 3 in the morning with existential panic. Just solid, restorative sleep. I should have been suspicious. Good things didn't last in my life. Not lately. I grabbed my phone at 8:37 a.m. I had 17 missed messages. 43 social media notifications that I rarely checked. 5 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. My stomach sank before I even opened anything. The first message was from my sister, Rachel. We hadn't spoken in months. She'd distanced herself after the scandal. Not out of malice, but self-preservation. Married to a corporate lawyer who didn't want association with a problematic journalist. She'd sent just a link and 3 words. Did you see this? I clicked the link. It was page 6. The damn page 6. Gossip column of the New York Post that existed solely to expose people's private lives for public entertainment. The headline hit me like a punch to the stomach. Tech tyrant's mysterious coffee date. Alexander Hunt spotted with disgraced journalist Emma Sinclair. Below, a photo. U.S. leaving the grind Saturday morning. The quality was good, clearly not just a casual iPhone photo, but professional lens. Paparazzi. Someone had followed us. Or recognized Alexander and took the photo to sell. In the image, we were walking side by side, not touching but close. He was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face in public photos, soft, almost smiling. I was looking back, and my face showed ... hope, vulnerability, something that looked dangerously close to affection. It looked intimate. It looked personal. It looked exactly like what it was. The article was distilled poison. It speculated about our relationship. Questioned why a billionaire CEO would be in Brooklyn with disgraced journalists known for fabricating sexual harassment scandal that ruined respected editors' career. Suggested I was manipulating him. Quoted sources close, aka no one. Probably just the journalist making it up, saying the Hunt Technologies board was concerned about CEO's recent personal choices. Implied I was a gold digger, opportunist, that I was seducing a vulnerable man for financial gain. The irony of calling me an opportunist when I could barely pay rent would have been funny if it wasn't devastating. I kept reading. Couldn't stop. It was like watching a car accident, horrible but impossible to look away. They dug up everything. The Cardenas scandal. The victims who retracted. Quotes from old articles calling me a dishonest journalist. A photo of me from back then, 3 years younger, different hair, face full of confidence that didn't exist anymore. They compared that photo with a more recent one. I didn't know where they got it. Probably LinkedIn or a social network I'd stopped updating. The difference was brutal. 3 years had aged me a decade. Dark circles, thinner face, eyes that had seen too much disappointment. The comments were worse. They always were. Scrolling to the comments section of any article about you is digital masochism, but I did it anyway. Because part of me still believed I deserved punishment. She's clearly using him. Women like this are predators. Hunt needs better judgment. She destroyed one man. Now going for the next. Obvious gold digger. Why do rich men always fall for pretty broken women? Pretty. At least some thought I was pretty. Small victories. I threw the phone on the bed as if it were burning. My heart was racing. Breathing short. Panic starting to rise. That familiar feeling of walls closing, air getting thin, world becoming too small to contain all the anxiety. I breathed deeply. 1, 2, 3. Held it. 1, 2, 3. Released. Technique a therapist taught me before I couldn't afford sessions anymore. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. Today it worked enough that I didn't have a complete collapse. I grabbed the phone again. Needed to warn Alexander. He probably already knew billionaires had teams to monitor media, but it needed to be me telling him. Needed him to hear it from me first. I opened our chat. Typed a message. Saw page 6 had published a photo. That the article was bad. That I was dealing with it, but wanted him to know. Response came in seconds. He already knew. His assistant had alerted him at 6 in the morning. His PR was in damage control mode. Board had called an emergency meeting for that afternoon. Said he was sorry. That it was his fault, should have been more careful. Should have predicted paparazzi. I said it was no one's fault. That we'd done nothing wrong. Public coffee in Brooklyn wasn't a crime. But even typing it, I knew it didn't matter. In the court of public opinion, perception was reality. And the perception was that I was taking advantage of him. He asked if I was okay, if I needed anything. I lied and said I was fine. Just frustrated. Nothing I couldn't handle. He didn't believe it. I could feel it through the text, but didn't push. Said he'd call me after the board meeting. That we'd figure this out together. Together. Nice word. I wondered if it would be true when the board finished pressuring him. I spent the day in anxious fog. Tried to write, I had clickbait articles due. Because regardless of personal drama, bills didn't stop but couldn't focus. Words wouldn't come. Brain was too busy catastrophizing. I checked social media compulsively despite knowing it was self-destruction. The article had gone viral. Twitter was on fire. Tech Twitter especially, everyone had an opinion about Alexander Hunt and his questionable choices. Some defended. Said he was an adult capable of making his own choices. That his personal life was personal. But more people attacked. Called him weak. Said he was having a public nervous breakdown. Questioned his fitness as CEO if his judgment was so poor. and everyone attacked me, because it's always easier to blame the woman. Always. My phone rang at 3:47 p.m. Unknown number. Almost didn't answer, probably a journalist wanting a quote or a troll wanting to yell, but something made me answer. It was Rebecca Walsh, CEO of CloudMind, one of Hunt Technologies' competitors. We'd met briefly years ago when I covered tech for the Times. She'd been a source in some articles. She was direct. Said she'd seen the article. Wanted to know if it was true. Was I really involved with Alexander Hunt? I hesitated. Didn't know what to say. How do you define involved when you'd had one kiss and spent Saturday together but hadn't labeled anything? Rebecca interpreted my silence correctly. Said she understood. And then offered unsolicited advice. Alexander Hunt was complicated, she said. She'd known him for years. Corporate circles overlapped. He was brilliant but deeply damaged. The kind of man who could love you intensely and destroy you simultaneously, not out of malice but inability to be vulnerable when it really mattered. Said that when pressure came, and it would come, it always came from men in his position, he'd choose the company. Choose reputation, choose safety. Because that's what men like him did. Didn't matter what they felt. Survival came first. She said this out of kindness, supposedly. To warn me. Protect me. But it felt cruel anyway. I thanked her and hung up. Sat staring at the wall of my apartment, that stained wall with water damage my landlord refused to fix, and wondered if she was right. If when the choice came, Alexander would choose me. Or if he'd choose what he always chose, safety, performance, survival. My phone vibrated. Message from him. Board meeting had ended. We needed to talk. In person. Tonight. The tone was different. More formal, more distant. My stomach sank deeper. I responded okay, where and when. He suggested my apartment, more private. Less chance of more photos. I agreed, said I'd be here. He said he'd arrive at 8. It was a little after 4. 3 hours to prepare for a conversation I already knew wouldn't be good. I frantically cleaned the apartment. Not that there was much to clean in 35 square meters, but I needed to do something with my hands and nervousness. Washed accumulated dishes, folded clothes, tried to make the space look less depressing. Failed. It still looked exactly like what it was, tiny apartment of a broken person trying to survive in a city that spat out broken people. At 7:55 p.m., there was a knock on the door. I opened it. Alexander was there, in a suit this time. Not the casual Saturday wear. Full suit, tie. Hair perfectly arranged, posture back to military mode. The CEO had returned. He entered without smiling, without kissing me hello, without any of the softness that had existed Saturday. I offered coffee. He refused, said he wouldn't be long. Wouldn't be long. As if my apartment were an unpleasant obligation. As if I were an unpleasant obligation. We sat. Him in the only available spot besides the bed, the chair from the table. Me on the edge of the bed because there was no other option. He started talking. Controlled voice. Calculated. Every word measured. Said the board was concerned. That investors were asking questions. That negative media was affecting company stock price. That there were calls for him to take a pause as CEO until personal issues were resolved. Said his lawyers recommended distance. That PR suggested a statement denying a relationship. That everyone in his professional life was saying I was a liability, risk. He said all this while looking slightly above my head. Not in my eyes. As if making eye contact made it more real. More painful. I asked what he wanted, not what the board wanted. Not what lawyers recommended. But what he, Alexander, the man who'd kissed me just 2 days ago, wanted. He finally looked at me. And I saw war happening in his eyes. CO versus poet. Mask versus man. Said he wanted to protect me. That I didn't deserve this. Being dragged through media again. Having my name destroyed once more. That he'd done this by exposing me. By being selfish. By wanting something personal when he had no right to personal. I said I'd chosen. That no one forced me. That I knew the risks. He said, I didn't know. not really. That this was just the beginning. That the longer we continued, the worse it would get. That media didn't stop. That trolls didn't tire. That I'd be dissected, attacked, destroyed, again, and he couldn't watch that happen. So I asked what he was saying, specifically, clearly. He breathed deeply. That controlled breath he used when holding emotion. Said he thought we should pause. Take a step back. Let the media storm pass. And then, maybe when things calmed down, when there was less attention, when there wasn't so much at stake, ... Maybe we could try again, maybe. I stared at him. At this man who told me just 2 days ago that he wanted to stop being divided. That he wanted to integrate. That he wanted someone who saw him completely. And now was doing exactly what Rebecca had predicted. Choosing safety. Performance. Survival. I asked if he really believed that. That we could pause feelings like they were a Netflix subscription. That we could just wait for the storm to pass and then pick up where we left off as if nothing had changed. He didn't answer. Which was answer enough. I said I understood. That I didn't blame him. That it was too much to ask choosing a ruined journalist over $1 billion empire. That it made logical sense. Business sense. But that he should be honest. Not frame this as protecting me when he was protecting himself. His reputation. His company. His status. This was a choice. And choice revealed priorities. He flinched as if I'd hit him. Said it wasn't fair. That it wasn't that simple. I said it was exactly that simple. Either I mattered more than public opinion or I didn't. Either he was willing to fight for this or he wasn't. Either we were real or we weren't. And clearly we weren't. He was quiet for a long time. Jaw tight. Hands clenched. Internal war visible in every line of tension in his body. Finally said my name. Emma. Soft. Broken. Said he wanted to choose me. That every fiber of him wanted to say fuck it to the board and media and public opinion and just be with me. But he couldn't, because it wasn't just about him. It was 3,000 jobs. It was investors who'd trusted millions. It was responsibility he'd assumed when he founded the company. He didn't have the luxury of choosing heart over head. Not when so many people depended on him and he was so scared. Scared that if he chose me, he'd destroy everything. And then he'd have no company and would lose me anyway because I'd hate him for ruining so many lives out of selfishness. It was impossible. All impossible. I listened. Really listened. And part of me understood. Because I also knew impossibility. Knew making choices where there was no good option. Where any path led to loss. But another part of me, the part that had believed he was different, that we were different, was broken. Because in the end, he was doing what everyone did. Choosing safety. Choosing fear. Choosing the version of himself the world approved of over the version I knew. I told him it was okay. That I understood. That I wouldn't hold a grudge. But that I also wouldn't wait. Wouldn't pause my life in hope of maybe future when the storm passed, because storms didn't pass for people like me. They just changed shape. If he was leaving, he should really leave. Not half leave keeping the door open, completely. And I'd move on. Somehow. He asked about the book. Would I still write it? I almost laughed. Of course, book. What had started all this before it got messy? Well, of course. I said no. I couldn't write objectively now. Not when I was personally involved. Not when every word would be colored by this. I suggested he find another ghostwriter. Someone less complicated. He said he didn't want someone else. He wanted my voice, my perspective. I said it was too late for that. Some doors, once closed, didn't reopen. Heavy silence filled the tiny apartment. All the unsaid between us. Alexander stood up. Smoothed his suit that had no wrinkles. Nervous habit. Said he was sorry. That this wasn't what he wanted. That if there were any other way, I said there was. There always was. It was just a matter of courage. And then, because I was tired and hurt and wanted to hurt back, I said Rebecca Walsh had called. Had warned that when pressure came, he'd choose the company. I hadn't believed her. Had defended him. Thought he was different. I was wrong. He looked devastated. Asked if that was really how I saw it. As a coward. As a man who couldn't choose. I said I didn't know how I saw it. Just knew I was tired of being second choice. Of being secret. Of being what people chose when convenient and discarded when it got hard. That I'd lived 3 years being discarded. Wouldn't live more. He nodded. Slowly. As if each movement cost something. Walked to the door. Hand on the knob. Stopped. Turned. One last time. Said he'd bleed. When he said maybe we could try later, there was no maybe. Because I deserved someone who chose me first. Without hesitation, without calculation, without fear. And he wasn't that someone, no matter how much he wished to be. Apologized for wasting my time. For making me hope for something he couldn't give. And then he left. The door closed with a soft click. Didn't slam. Just ... closed. Like relationships end. Not with drama, but with a whisper. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Without crying. Without feeling much of anything. Just ... empty. It had happened again. I'd opened up. I'd believed. I'd hoped. And I'd been left. The difference this time was I wasn't surprised. Part of me always knew it would end like this. People like Alexander Hunt didn't end up with people like me. Not in the real world. Only in stories. And this wasn't a story. It was life. Brutal and disillusioning and cruelly predictable. My phone vibrated. Message. From him. Just 3 words. Tech Summit International. Friday. And then, I need you there. Something's going to happen. Something important. He wasn't asking, wasn't begging. Just ... stating. I looked at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it. Block him. Never speak to him again. But the journalist in me, that part that never died, no matter how broken I got, was curious. What could happen? What was he planning? And why did he need me there? I didn't respond. Not immediately. Just sat staring at the ceiling of my apartment, listening to Brooklyn Live outside sirens and laughter and music and life continuing indifferent to small dramas in tiny studios. Friday. 4 days. I had 4 days to decide if I'd go. If I'd give him another chance to disappoint me. Or if I'd finally learned the lesson life had been trying to teach for 3 years. Hope was a luxury people like me couldn't afford. But even thinking that, I knew I'd go. Because I was a journalist. And journalists chase stories. Even when stories promised to break what little remained of the heart. Especially then. Chapter 8. Breakdown. The worst kinds of pain are the ones you see coming but can't avoid. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday passed in a fog. I existed more than lived. Woke up. Coffee. Tried to write. Failed. Checked social media compulsively, even knowing it was poison. Ate when I remembered, which was rare. Slept poorly. Woke worse. The Page 6 article had done exactly what articles like that do. It grew. Metastasized. Other outlets picked up the story. TMZ. BuzzFeed. Tech blogs. Everyone had an opinion about Alexander Hunt and his problematic journalist. More photos surfaced. Someone had followed us Saturday. Had photos of us entering his Tribeca building. Speculation exploded about what we'd done there. Comments were creative and disgusting in equal measure. My name was everywhere again. Not the way I wanted, not for good journalism, not for important stories. But as curiosity. Scandal. The woman who seduced powerful men. First Cardenas, who I'd supposedly invented accusations against. Now Hunt, a pattern, the comments said. She had a type. I stopped reading after Thursday. For sanity, for survival. Alexander didn't contact me beyond that message about Friday. No explanation, no conversation. Just silence. And that enigmatic message, Tech Summit International, I need you there. Something's going to happen. I decided Tuesday I wouldn't go. Had pride. Had limits. Wouldn't come running when he called after discarding me. Wednesday, I was 70% sure I wouldn't go. Thursday, 50%. Friday morning, I was on the subway heading to the Javits Center, hating every choice that brought me there. Because I was a journalist. And there was a story, I felt it. That familiar feeling in the stomach that said something important was about to happen. And because, God help me, part of me still cared about what happened to him. Even after everything? Especially after everything. The Tech Summit International was bigger than the previous one. Twice the size, 3 times the audience. Sponsors from around the world. CEOs, investors, tech media, influencers, all the important players in one place. And Alexander Hunt was the main keynote, announcing something revolutionary according to press releases. Biggest deal in Hunt Technologies history. International partnership that would change the cybersecurity industry. Stakes couldn't be higher. I got a press credential again, easier this time because I was news. Journalists wanted to see me. Take a photo. Ask about Alexander. I avoided everyone, keeping my head down, hoodie pulled up. I entered the main auditorium an hour before the keynote. Needed a good seat, needed to see clearly. I chose the middle of the auditorium again. Aisle. Easy exit. But this time not out of panic, out of strategy. If something happened, I needed to be able to move fast. The auditorium filled quickly. Energy buzz was palpable. Expectation. Everyone knew something big was being announced. I checked my phone compulsively. Nothing from Alexander. Part of me expected a message. Confirmation that he knew I was there. Some sign that this mattered. Silence. 15 minutes before the keynote started, my phone finally vibrated. It wasn't Alexander. It was an unknown number. Text message. Emma, this is David Chen, Ku of Hunt Tech. Alexander isn't well. Very unwell. But he's insisting on doing the presentation. I don't know what to do. He mentioned you. Said you'd understand. Please be ready. My heart sank. I responded. Ready for what? Response. I don't know. He just said, Emma will know. Great. No pressure. 10 minutes. Lights started to lower. Corporate video on the giant screen. Hunt Technologies logo spinning. Epic music that probably cost a fortune to license. 5 minutes. My heart was beating so hard I could hear blood in my ears. Hands sweating. That feeling of something very wrong about to happen. 2 minutes. Presenter on stage. Same fake energy as before. Introducing Alexander Hunt. Listing achievements. Preparing the audience. 1 minute. And then he walked out. I knew immediately. Something was wrong. He was in a suit perfect as always. Dark gray, black tie, shoes shining. Military perfect posture. Completely controlled face. But his eyes were wrong. Too bright. Too focused. Like someone operating on pure adrenaline and willpower. Like someone on the edge of collapse pretending to be okay. I'd seen that expression before. In myself, in the mirror on bad days. When you push through sheer panic because stopping means completely falling apart. He reached center stage. Stopped. Looked at the auditorium. 5,000 people watching live. Tens of thousands streaming online. Impossible pressure. And he began to speak. His voice was different from last time. More tense. Less controlled. Still trying to perform CEO, but the cracks were showing. He talked about innovation. About the future of cybersecurity. About the important announcement. Partnership with the Japanese government. $3 billion deal. Biggest contract in company history. It should have been triumph. Culminating victory. But he looked tormented. 10 minutes into the presentation, I noticed his hands trembling slightly. He kept them in his pockets when not gesturing. Trying to hide. 15 minutes. He lost his place in the slide. Stopped. Recovered. But the pause was noticeable. People around me murmuring. 20 minutes. His breathing was getting shallow. I could see from where I sat chest rising and falling too fast. Hyperventilation starting. Panic attack. He was having a panic attack. On stage, live, in front of 5,000 people. And he was fighting desperately to hide it. I tried to calculate. How long until he collapsed completely? 5 minutes? 10? Could he finish the presentation? 23 minutes. He was explaining terms of the Japan deal when he stopped mid-sentence. Just stopped. Frozen. Looking at the audience with an expression of growing terror. Absolute silence in the auditorium. 5,000 people watching a billionaire CEO have a breakdown in real time. He tried to continue, opened his mouth. No words came out. Tried again. Nothing. His hands came out of his pockets, visibly trembling now. Sweat on his forehead under stage lights. Breathing in short, rapid gasps. Total panic. No mask to hide behind. No control. Just Alexander Hunt, completely human and completely broken, in front of the entire world. The backstage team was probably panicking too, but they couldn't do anything. Couldn't drag the CEO off stage in the middle of the most important announcement in company history without creating a bigger disaster. They were trapped. He was trapped. And I saw the exact moment he gave up. When he realized he couldn't perform anymore. That the mask had finally broken irreparably. His eyes searched the auditorium. Searching for what? Exit. Help. Me. Our eyes met. Through 5,000 people, through distance and hurt and everything that had happened between us. And I saw in his face pure terror. Absolute vulnerability. Silent plea. Help me. Help me. My brain screamed all the reasons not to get involved. He discarded me. Chosen company over me. Left me to deal with media alone while he hid behind PR. Why should I help? But my body was already moving. Because in the end, I wasn't a person who watched someone suffering and did nothing. Even when that someone hurt me. Especially when that someone hurt me and I understood why. I stood up. Started walking down the aisle toward the stage. People looked. Recognition on some faces. The journalists from the photos. Confusion on others. Security started moving to intercept me. But I was faster. I climbed the side steps of the stage. Security tried to stop me. I pushed past. Not violently. Just determinedly. 5,000 people watching. Live cameras for the entire world. And I walked to Alexander Hunt. He was still frozen. Eyes wide. Breathing in gasps. Clearly in the middle of a severe panic attack. I stopped in front of him. Between him and the audience. My presence blocking part of their view. I said his name. Soft. Just for him to hear. His eyes focused on me. Recognition. Relief. Terror. He tried to speak. Sorry. Sorry. Broken words, barely audible. I said it was okay. Breathe. With me. Me. I demonstrated. Deep breath in. Hold. Slow out. He tried to follow. Failed. Panic too big. I took his hand. Didn't care that 5,000 people saw. Didn't care about cameras or consequences. Just held his hand and breathed with him. And then, because the silence was becoming unbearable and someone needed to say something, I turned to face the audience. 5,000 faces looking back. Shocked. Confused. Some recognizing me from the photos. I took the microphone that was clipped to Alexander's lapel. My voice echoed through the sound system. I said my name. Emma Sinclair. Journalist. Said that 3 years ago, I tried to expose truth and was destroyed for it. I learned that in our society, there's a cost to being real. A cost to admitting imperfection. A cost to showing vulnerability. I looked at Alexander, still holding his hand. Said this man here was having a panic attack at that moment. That he'd worked 18 hours a day, sacrificing his mental health, because he'd learned that leading means never showing weakness. That he's also a midnight philosopher. Audible gasp from the audience. Murmurs, phones coming out. This would be viral in seconds. I continued. Said that the podcast that helped 500,000 people feel less alone was made by this man. Because in that space he could be real. That the deal he was going to announce, partnership worth $3 billion with Japan, would save and create thousands of jobs, would change the industry. But did they know the cost? I looked at him, tears running down his face now, not trying to hide. Mask completely destroyed. Said the cost was a human being breaking, so we didn't have to see a CEO cry. To maintain the illusion that leaders are superhuman. That success doesn't come with a brutal price. That we punish vulnerability and then wonder why so many people suffer in silence. Said Alexander Hunt was human, flawed, imperfect, and brave in a way none of us understood. Because coming here today, knowing he was breaking down but trying anyway, that was courage, not the false courage of never showing fear, but real courage of continuing to try even when terrified. And then I did what I came to do. The sacrifice he needed. I said we weren't just a professional connection. That I developed feelings for him. And when media exposed us, when pressure came, he chose to protect the company. He chose right. Because 3,000 families depended on Hunt Technologies. Because responsibility mattered. But in the process, we lost something. He lost another piece of humanity. Another layer of himself sacrificed on the altar of corporate perfection. And I was tired of watching people destroy themselves out of fear of being real. So I was here, publicly, saying the truth no one wanted to hear. Success that requires you to stop being human isn't worth it. Wealth that costs your mental health is disguised poverty. And we, as a society, need to stop punishing vulnerability and start honoring the courage to be real. Absolute silence. And then, slow, starting from the back, one person started clapping. Then another, and another. Standing ovation. 5,000 people on their feet. Applauding not the deal. Not corporate success, but humanity, vulnerability, truth. Alexander collapsed. Completely. Fell to his knees there on stage, sobbing. Years of tension and control and performance coming out in waves. I knelt beside him, arms around him while he broke. Didn't care about cameras. Didn't care about the world watching. Just held him while he fell apart. Like he'd held space for me to fall apart in midnight conversations. Turns. Backstage finally reacted. David Chen came on stage. Announced the presentation would be postponed. That deal details would be released via press release. That they appreciated everyone's understanding. Security discreetly escorted us backstage. Alexander still couldn't speak. Just held my hand like a lifeline. They put us in a private green room. Water, towels. Space to recover. The door closed. Finally privacy. Alexander looked at me. Destroyed face. Red eyes. Hoarse voice. Said why I did that. After he left me. After he chose the company. I told the truth. Because no one deserved to suffer alone. Because I understood what it was to break down publicly. Because even hurt and angry, I couldn't watch him destroy himself. And because, God help me, I still cared. Even when I didn't want to, especially when I didn't want to, he said he was sorry. So sorry for everything, for choosing fear, for letting fear win. That watching me sacrifice myself for him, expose myself again, risk myself again after media had already destroyed me once showed exactly who was the coward in this story. It wasn't me. It never was. It was him. And he was going to fix it. Didn't know how, but he'd try. I said we'd talk. Later, when he was more stable. But first, he needed to take care of himself. Really take care, not perform care, not hide. He promised. And this time I believed him. Because masks, once completely broken, didn't come back so easily. And Alexander Hunt had just had every mask destroyed in front of the entire world. Now came the hard part, learning to live without them. Chapter 9. After the fall. Going viral is a strange experience when you're at the center. The video was everywhere within hours. My speech on stage. Alexander breaking down. Standing ovation. All captured in perfect HD from multiple angles. Shared millions of times. I didn't watch beyond the first 30 seconds. Couldn't. Seeing myself doing that, exposing me and Alexander so completely made my stomach turn. Part courage, part horror, part one can't believe I actually did that. But I did. And now the entire world had opinions. I stayed with Alexander in the first hours after. Medical team from the conference checked him, high blood pressure, dehydration, extreme exhaustion. Nothing that hospitalized, but everything indicating he'd been operating on fumes for too long. They recommended rest, intensive therapy, possibly temporary medication for anxiety. David Chen, the coup, took control. Cancelled Alexander's commitments for the next week. Issued official statement about CEO taking necessary time for mental health, demonstrating courageous leadership by prioritizing well-being. PR spin. But honest this time. They offered to take me home in a company car. I accepted. Was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical. Emotionally drained. Mentally fried. Alexander insisted on going with me. Said he needed to know I was safe. That I'd be okay. I didn't argue. Too tired to argue. In the car black SUV with tinted windows, silent driver, we sat in silence for a long time. Just existing in the same space. Processing. Finally, he spoke. Voice still hoarse from crying. Said he didn't know how to thank me. That what I did was beyond anything anyone had done for him. That I'd sacrificed my privacy again to save him. And that he didn't deserve it. I said it wasn't about deserving. It was about doing what was right. He said he'd spend the rest of his life trying to make up for it, trying to be worthy. I said he didn't need to. Didn't want him owing me. I wanted honesty, vulnerability, the real version of him. If he could give that, it was enough. He promised to try. The car dropped me off in Brooklyn. Alexander got out too, insisting on walking me to the door. Protection or procrastination from returning to his empty apartment? I didn't know. We went up the 4 flights. My feet hurt. Entire body hurt. Adrenaline had finally drained, leaving just exhaustion. At my door, we stopped. Awkward goodbye moment. He asked if he could call me tomorrow. Check how I was. Start a real conversation about what happens now. I said yes. He hesitated. And then kissed me. Soft. Brief. More question than statement. I didn't pull back, but also didn't deepen it. Just let it happen and then opened the door and went inside, alone again. I collapsed on the bed without taking off clothes. Slept for 14 straight hours. No dreams, just necessary black void. I woke up Saturday at 3 in the afternoon. Phone had died. Plugged it in and watched while it charged enough to turn on. Hundreds of notifications. Hundreds. My heart sank. I started reading, bracing for hatred, for attacks. For everything that normally came when I was in the news. But it wasn't hate, not mostly. Messages from strangers saying thank you. That what I said on stage resonated. That they also struggled with mental health. That seeing a billionaire CEO admit vulnerability made them feel less alone. Messages from journalists wanting interviews. But tones were different. Respectful. Interested in the real story, not just scandal. Messages from mental health organizations asking me to speak at events, and most surprising messages from editors. Editors of real publications, saying they'd watched the video. That they remembered my work from the Times. Asking if I was interested in writing, not clickbait. Real articles. Investigations. The work I loved. Life throwing a curveball. Again, this time up instead of down. Social media was mixed. Some still attacked me, there would always be those. Called it a publicity stunt. Manipulation. Drama. But the majority? The majority was supporting. Serious discussions about corporate mental health, about the cost of success, about needing to normalize vulnerability. At Midnight Philosopher had gained 2 million followers overnight. People revisiting old episodes with new context, understanding now who was speaking, and Alexander was trending. Not negatively. Hashtag courageous leadership, hashtag mental health matters, hashtag real CEO. A bizarre script flip from the usual. My phone rang. Familiar number this time. Rachel, my sister. I answered. Hesitant. She spoke first. Said she'd watched the video. Cried. That she was proud. That she'd been a coward in abandoning me during the scandal. Apologized. Asked if we could talk. Really talk. Rebuild. I said yes, of course. Always yes. Family was complicated. But it was family. Calls continued. Messages continued. I answered what I could, ignored the rest, focused on what mattered. And then, Sunday night, Alexander finally called. His voice sounded different, lighter, like a weight he'd carried for years had finally been put down. He asked how I was. Really asked. Listened to the answer. I told him everything. The messages, the offers, the reactions, the confusion of suddenly being not hated. He said he understood. That his phone was also exploding. That the board had met emergency sessions Sunday morning. My heart sank. Here it came. Firing. Punishment for being publicly human. But no. The board had voted, unanimously, to keep him as CEO, with condition he had to really do therapy. Really rest. Really prioritize health. And they wanted to implement mental health programs throughout the company. Make Hunt Technologies a model for how tech could better care for employees, turn his breakdown into a movement. Investors also reacted. Some sold shares, scared. But the majority stayed. Some even bought more. Said they preferred an honest CEO who admitted struggle to a CEO who faked perfection. The Japan deal. Still standing. Japanese government had issued a statement supporting courageous approach to mental health and saying they were honored by the partnership. Everything that should have collapsed didn't collapse. The world had changed. Or we were in a specific moment where vulnerability was rewarded instead of punished. Probably temporary, but we'd take it while it lasted. Alexander asked if we could see each other. Tuesday night. Dinner. Real dinner. Not hidden coffee in Brooklyn. Public dinner in Manhattan. He wanted to do it right. No hiding. No shame. Just us, as adults who liked each other trying to figure out if there was a future. I said yes. Despite nervousness. Despite fear. Despite everything. Because life had taught me that playing it safe didn't guarantee safety. Only guaranteed loneliness, and I was tired of being alone. Tuesday arrived faster than expected. I spent Monday and Tuesday responding to emails, setting up meetings with editors, starting to rebuild a career that had been destroyed. It wouldn't be easy. There were still people who hated me. Still damaged from years of being persona non grata. But for the first time in 3 years, there were doors opening. Possibilities. Hope. Dangerous luxury. But inevitable. Alexander sent a car to pick me up at 7. I'd bought a dress. First new clothing in a year. Simple, black, nothing fancy. But new. Mine. Felt like different armor. Not performative. Just appropriate. The driver took me to a restaurant in West Village. Discreet but elegant. The kind of place celebrities went when they wanted privacy in public. Alexander was waiting at a back table. Not in a suit. Dark jeans, blue button-up, casual blazer. Slightly messy hair. He stood when he saw me. Smiled. That real smile that transformed his face. And for the first time he didn't look divided. Not CEO or podcaster. Just Alexander. Integrated. Or starting to be. We had dinner, talked about everything. About nothing, about what happened Friday. About therapy he'd started daily sessions for now. About medication he was trying for anxiety. About the podcast. He'd continue. But now openly as Alexander Hunt. No anonymity. Using the platform to talk about mental health in tech. About my work. The offers coming in. Chance to rebuild. About us. The elephant in the room we were both avoiding until we couldn't anymore. Finally, over dessert neither of us was eating, he asked, what were we? What did we want to be? I thought for a long time before answering. Said I didn't know that this was new. Scary. Complicated. That we were two fundamentally broken people trying to figure out how to live unbroken. And maybe together we made sense. Or maybe we just magnified each other's breaks. There were no guarantees, but I wanted to try. If he wanted, no pressure. No expectations of perfection, just honest attempt. He said he wanted, more than anything, but was scared. Scared of failing. Of disappointing. Of not being enough. Of hurting me again when he inevitably chose wrong. I said he would hurt. Eventually. Inevitably. Because everyone hurt people they loved occasionally. And I'd hurt him too. I had baggage, trauma, bad days where I'd be impossible. But accidentally hurting was different from hurting out of cowardice. As long as we kept choosing each other, choosing honesty, choosing to try, we'd survive occasional hurts. He agreed, and then asked if I'd forgiven him. For Monday, for choosing the company, I said yes and no. Yes, because I understood. Because impossible choices didn't have right answers. No, because pain was still there. Memory of being discarded still hurt, but forgiveness wasn't a single event. It was a process, and I was processing. Patience would help. He promised patience, all the time I needed. We left the restaurant. A photographer captured us leaving. Would post in a tabloid tomorrow. More speculation. But this time, I didn't care as much. Because we weren't hiding. We walked through West Village. Cold autumn night. Falling leaves. Couples in cafes. Life happening. We didn't hold hands, still too new, still too uncertain. But we walked close. Shoulders occasionally touching. Comfortable in shared silence. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something beyond survival. I felt possibility. Felt like maybe, just maybe, good things could happen to broken people. If they were brave enough to try. Chapter 10. Rebuilt. 2 years. Strange time. Long enough for real change. Too short to forget who you were. I'm sitting in my apartment now, not the moldy studio in Bushwick, but a decent 1-bedroom in Park Slope that I can afford with my own money, typing the last words of this book. Not the book Alexander originally hired me to write, but the book we lived, the real story. Our story. My editor at Simon & Schuster, still surreal to have a real editor, at a real publishing house, said readers will want to know. Did we stay together? Was there a happy ending? The answer is complicated. Because real life is complicated. Yes, we stayed together. But not the way romances suggest. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. The first 6 months were the hardest. Both of us in intensive therapy. I could finally afford it, and Alexander was committed. Unraveling years of trauma. Learning to communicate. Learning that vulnerability wasn't weakness. We fought. A lot. About stupid things and important things. About me feeling he still prioritized work too much. About him feeling I didn't completely trust. About panic and depression and days where neither of us could function. We almost broke up 3 times, but we didn't. Because I learned something these 2 years. Love doesn't fix broken people. Love isn't a magic cure that erases trauma or repairs damage. But love can give a reason to want to do the work of fixing yourself. And we did the work. Alexander took 3 months off as CEO that first year. Real leave. David Chen took over temporarily. Alexander went to a mental health retreat upstate. No phone, no laptop, no company. Just therapy and nature and quiet. When he came back, he was different. Still CEO. Still hardworking. But with boundaries. Therapy twice a week, non-negotiable. No emails after 9 p.m., 1 complete day off per week. Hunt Technologies implemented the programs he'd promised. Free therapy for all employees. Mental health days. Management training on recognizing burnout. They became an industry model. Revenue grew, not despite the changes, because of them. Healthier employees were more productive. Who would have thought? The podcast continued. At Midnight Philosopher now had 5 million followers. Alexander did weekly episodes openly as himself, talking about ongoing struggle, about therapy, about bad days. People loved it because it was real, and real was rare. As for me, my career rebuilt in ways I didn't expect. The Tech Summit video opened doors, but it also opened old wounds. I had to publicly relitigate the Cardenas scandal. More interviews. More explanations. More reliving the worst moment of my life. But this time people listened, really listened. An independent investigation was reopened. Documents emerged showing payments Cardenas made to the victims. Exactly as I'd said. He was finally forced to resign. No fanfare. No acknowledgement I was right, but I was, and some people recognized it. The New York Times offered my job back. Same position. Same salary, formal apologies. I declined. Not out of resentment, but because I wasn't who I was anymore. Traditional journalism had failed me. Institutions had failed me. So I started something new. Independent newsletter. Investigative journalism funded by subscribers. No editors telling me what to cover. No corporate fear, just truth. It started small. 200 subscribers at $5 a month. $1,000 monthly. Didn't pay bills, but it grew. 5,000 subscribers. 10,000, now 30,000. 150,000 a year. Not rich, but sustainable. And more important, free. I write what matters. Expose what needs exposing. Without fear because I don't answer to a corporation. Only to readers. It's what journalism should be. This book was different. Memoir. Not journalism, but a story that needed to be told. Alexander fully supported it. Read every chapter. Cried at some. Laughed at others. Never asked me to change anything. Trusted me to tell the truth, even when truth didn't make him look good. That's real love. Not perfection, but trust. We still live separately. My apartment in Brooklyn, his in Tribeca. We need our own spaces, places to retreat when the world gets too much. But we spend most nights together. We cook, watch movies, read, exist. Friday nights are sacred. Dinner. Then we both do a live podcast together. Midnight conversations, an hour where we answer questions about relationships, mental health, success, and the cost of success. It's become surprisingly popular. 500,000 live listeners every week. People like hearing two broken people trying to figure out life publicly. Makes them feel less alone. I understand. That's how I felt listening to Alexander 2 years ago. Before I knew who he was. When he was just a voice in the darkness telling me that being broken didn't mean being alone. 3 months ago, he proposed. Not a big production. No ostentatious jewel. Just us on his couch, after a particularly emotional podcast episode where someone asked if we'd ever thought about marriage. He looked at me and said, I think about it. Every time I see you. Every time we survive a hard day together. Do you want to? Not romantic by traditional standards, but perfectly us. I said yes. Obviously. But also said, not yet. Not until I finish the book. Until we have more time being stable. Until I'm sure this is real future, not just shared trauma-seeking company. He understood. Said he'd wait. That there was no rush. That he'd spent his entire life rushing. Rushing to grow up, to succeed, to reach the next goal. And rushing had almost killed him. Slow was okay. Slow was better. So we're engaged but not planning a wedding. Committed but without a date. And it works. Because commitment isn't about ceremony. It's about daily choice. Choosing each other. Choosing honesty. Choosing to stay even when it's hard. And it is hard. Regularly. Alexander still has bad days. Panic attacks that appear unexpectedly. Moments where a workaholic tendency returns and I have to gently remind him about boundaries. I still have bad days. Depression that traps me in bed. PTSD triggers when I see articles about the scandal. Nightmares about being canceled again. But now we have tools. Therapy. Medication when needed. And each other. Not to fix, but to hold space while we fix ourselves. Yesterday, Alexander did something that surprised me. Announced he's writing a book too. About toxic masculinity in tech. About the cost of perfection. About unlearning everything an abusive father taught. It'll be brutally honest. He let me read the draft. I cried. Because I recognized all the pain. Saw all the growth. He'll use his real name. No hiding, no anonymity. Just Alexander Hunt saying, I was broken. I'm better. Still in process. And that's okay. I don't know how the world will react. it'll probably be divided. Some will applaud the courage. Others will say a CEO shouldn't admit weakness publicly. But he doesn't care anymore what he should do. Only cares about what's real. That's the biggest change. That's the healing. As for the future, I don't know. Honestly, don't know. I know I want to marry him, eventually, when timing is right. I know I want to keep writing, exposing truths, doing journalism that matters. I know we want to use our platforms, his in tech, mine in journalism, to change conversations about mental health. And I know we want to live, not just survive. Live. Travel. Have experiences. Maybe kids eventually, when we're both more stable. Raise little humans in an environment where vulnerability is honored, not punished. But mostly, keep choosing. Keep trying. Keep being brave enough to be real. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. Choose honesty over performance. Choose vulnerability over perfection. Choose love over fear. It's not easy. Never is. But it's real. And real is the only thing worth it. The live podcast ended 10 minutes ago. Friday night. We answered questions for an hour. About relationships. About therapy. About how to keep trying when everything seems impossible. The last question was from a young woman. Early 20s. Said she'd lost her job, apartment, was living on a friend's couch. Asked how we kept going when everything was falling apart. Alexander answered first. Said you keep going because the alternative giving up is finality. And while you're still breathing, there's possibility. I added, said you keep going out of anger, out of stubbornness, out of refusal to let the world win. And eventually, anger and stubbornness transform into hope. And hope transforms into progress. But it starts with just continuing. 1 day, 1 hour, 1 minute at a time. The woman thanked us. Said it helped. I hope so. Now Alexander is in the kitchen making tea. His post-podcast habit, ritual that calms nerves after being vulnerable publicly. I'm at the laptop typing these final words. My editor will receive the manuscript tomorrow. The book will be published in 3 months. After years of living, writing, revising. The Billionaire's Ghost, a love story about breaking down and building up. I don't know how it'll be received. Probably controversial. Probably criticized. There are always critics. But it's truth. Our truth. And truth, I learned, is the only thing worth the cost. Alexander comes back with 2 mugs. Hands me one. Sits beside me. Looks at the laptop screen. He asks, "Finished?" I say, "Yes, finally." He smiles, that real smile that changed everything. And says, "Welcome to the world, Ghost." It's time to exist. I close the laptop. Take a sip of tea. Look at this man who was an anonymous stranger 2.5 years ago. Who was a ghost. Who was broken. Who's still broken. Like me, like everyone. But broken doesn't mean irreparable. It means human. And humanity, with all its imperfection and pain and beauty, is enough. More than enough. It's everything. I put my head on his shoulder. He kisses my hair. We stay like this. 2 shipwreck survivors who found shore. Not because they were saved, but because they saved each other. And then, together, learned to swim. Outside, New York continues. City that never sleeps. City of millions of stories. Ours is just one. But it's ours. And finally, for the first time in a long time, it's enough to be just that. Real, imperfect, alive.